evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thinker St. James here, and I know what you are thinking out there. You're saying to yourself, Thinker, how could it be possible that you once again are coming back to the Smashing Machine for more content? And I think that the answer is rather simple. If you recall, myself and Chase Parton were very quick to get our reviews of the Smashing Machine 2025 out after having reviewed the original documentary. We saw very early screenings of the Smashing Machine in order to get our thoughts out there to you guys as quickly as possible, but that did not allow us to comment on the aftermath of the film's release. And we have now come to find out that the film did not do very well in the box office. It unfortunately bombed pretty well. I mean, that's the consensus is that it was not a very successful film on the budget that it had and the return that it made. So today, what I want to do is go over a couple of reviews that I have found from other creators and parse their thoughts a little bit, select a couple of their key points, talk about that, and see if we can, through that analysis, come to a conclusion as to why the Smashing Machine 2025 was a failure. We will get started with that in just a bit. I appreciate you being here with me on a Sunday night. TJF, Beeb, Savage all checking in. How are you, gentlemen? WTJF, WTJF indeed. I appreciate your W Yama. Rick Allen has two dads. He has two ads. He's running two ad campaigns. Rick Allen has two dads is confirmed lore at this point. I think that is just established. So, it's permeating into other live streams from what I understand. I've heard Chase Parton commenting on this as well. So it's common knowledge at this point. I guess it's just taken as fact. You go around, the sky is blue, water's wet. Rick Allen has two dads. Why does Yama keep talking about the Smashing Machine? Exactly. Well, I think that I gave a pretty decent introduction as to why we're doing that today, but hopefully that was enough to make you understand where we're coming from with this. What's up, homie G? Peace Slice, my sweet baby boy. Yo, Savage, good to see you, brother. And Chase Parton himself checking in. Yo, Chase, how are you, sir? Good to see you in the chat as well. We are going to get into this analysis momentarily here. So to start off, I brought up the Wikipedia. And the reason that I brought this up was not to go through all of the details of the film. I'm sure by now you are aware that The Smashing Machine is a 2025 Benny Safdie film starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, no longer The Rock, just Dwayne Johnson, and Emily Blunt as Mark Kerr and Dawn, respectively. Also, Ryan Bader as Mark Coleman, Bas Rutten as himself, Oleksandr Usek as Igor Vovchanchyn. These are the facts of the film. Of course, this film had a budget of $50 million and returned $18 million. Now, generally, in film terms, you want your film to make double the budget because that is the cost of the film and then also the cost associated with advertising. And the first point that I want to make about that before we even get into the reviews that I'm going to be reacting to is that I heard people saying that the marketing was poor for this film. I didn't think that was the case. I actually saw a good amount of marketing for it. Now, that could just be because I am in the MMA world and the algorithm feeds me MMA content. That is certainly a possibility. But I had seen it on a number of television shows as well. The advertisement for it, the trailer being played, YouTube, obviously UFC events and things like that. So within the UFC and MMA ecosystem, the Smashing Machine was well represented, and I believe, at least to an extent, outside of that world as well. I guarantee that I had seen it in a couple of other places that did not touch the MMA world. So to my estimation, that would be good advertising and good marketing. when there's a film like this, which is a lower budget, I call this a mid-budget film in today's standards. Mid-budget used to be about $30 million. Now, with the economy and inflation and all the elements that go into how money is calculated, $50 million seems like about a mid-budget film at this point. As far as mid-budget films go, their marketing isn't always very strong to begin with. So you'll occasionally have certain films with big-name stars that will get decent pushes, especially if they think that there are Oscar implications for them. I don't know if that was the specific aim of this film. There's a lot of speculation that that's the case. This was supposed to be The Rock's big Oscar film. But either way, regardless of what the reasoning was, I thought that the promotion for this film was somewhat decent. But that all aside, the reason that I wanted to bring this up specifically was to comment on the critical reception, which we'll get into here in a second. We are the only ones who love the Smashing Machine enough to cover it 6 times in 4-hour length streams. This is facts. This is absolutely facts. I've always said this, that Yama, between Yama, Chase, the Yamasphere, the Yamaverse, we are the preeminent Smashing Machine source on YouTube. You could say that MMA On Point maybe a little bit more because they go deeper into the history, and I think that they've gotten a little bit closer with like some of the filmmakers and stuff, and that's great. And I think that they're an awesome channel with some really quality creators on it. But I don't care. We're the best when it comes to the Smashing Machine, and that's just the way that it is. So. Point blank, period, end of story. You cannot change my mind. No takesy backsies on that. TJF is the fucking man. That is definitely true. And I just wanted to real quickly say I saw that Nicholas Dalby has a fight coming up. Who is this guy that he's fighting? Have I seen him before and didn't recognize his name because he did not look familiar? I saw coverage on the Smashing Machine once on local news the week of the release, and that's it. Okay, well, I mean, if that's the case, then maybe it was stronger in certain areas. That's another thing, too, that's very different nowadays when it comes to advertising campaigns. That's one thing I think is interesting from a marketing perspective as a person who works in marketing as well. The evolution of how film advertising has changed over the years. I don't know if that double the budget figure still makes sense in current times, because the way that the budgets are allocated for digital marketing has to be completely different than it was traditionally before the prominence of online marketing campaigns and the newer methodologies that they use for it. Because back in the day, the double the budget figure, like if your film was $25 million, then the take home you needed to make to break even was $50 million. And the reason for that was that they would put double the budget into the marketing. And that was generally to buy ad space on television, maybe billboards, radio spots, and sometimes print media. That's like pre-internet, of course. I mean, this is going way back for that. I'm even into early internet. If we're talking like early 2000s, that was probably still that way before online advertising was what it is now. But now that the internet is the primary source for all information, I would think that the segmentation of the populations that they want to advertise to is probably broken down a lot differently. So if you see advertisements on television, that's going to be like a shotgun approach, but they're probably digging down deeper into demographics in order to feed advertisements to the appropriate people that they're trying to target. That's why as an MMA creator, I get more MMA related content, and the Smashing Machine was fed to me. But I think outside of that sphere, they tried to make a more concerted effort to target people not just in the MMA world, to broaden the appeal and also say that this is a film that is supposed to resonate with people who are not fans of the sport, which is really more who I think this film was for. We talked about that on the review. If you're not aware of the review that myself and Chase Parton did, I would highly recommend watching that as a companion piece to this. In Vegas, the fight capital, I would think that film would be way more advertised. Yes. Not necessarily. Not necessarily now. That's the thing, is I think that the way that they were trying to push the messaging about this film out was probably to overstep the fight world. I don't think that the idea was to get this directly to fight people. However, the problem there becomes you need to get both the core audience, which would be fight people, and then the rest of the world. So I don't know if what I will say about that aspect of it is I don't know if the messaging was strong enough to lure people in who are not fight people. Because that's the thing that I noticed about the advertising. Like the trailers didn't necessarily convey a lot of the heart of the film, I don't think. They tried to make it more of like a Rocky style story, is like what the presentation looked like, which I guess you can say that there are certain elements of that in the movie, but I think that there should have been more of a push to go after the human element, because really at the core of this story, it's about a pair of people's relationships and a drug abuse situation. So I think that those elements probably should have been brought more to the forefront if they were going to try to hook in people who were less involved in the fight world. But that takes us to the box office reception here. This is why I brought up the Wikipedia article. Box Office says, as of October 17th, 2025, The Smashing Machine has grossed $11 million in the United States and Canada and $7 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $18 million. One of the big flounderings of this film is the fact that it did not do well overseas, which is actually very surprising to me. If there was any misstep in their marketing, I would think that it would have been that they did not target outside of the United States harder. Their domestic targeting was probably a lot stronger than their international targeting, and that is a big misstep. Because I think that there might have been audiences in different regions. Now, I know culturally, there are a lot of differences in what different cultures consume and want to consume, but I would have thought that because it is a human story at its core, that the human connection element of it might have been stronger in other territories, when in America we have such a glut of content to be consumed at all times. So it's like, I would have thought that Japan would have been a very big market for this film with the Pride connection. There might be a good amount of people in Japan who still remember that era, and a good mixed martial arts base there. Even the Japanese people who are not mixed martial arts fans might have been interested in it. South Korea. Asian markets in general, I think, probably would have enjoyed this film. I would say also maybe the UK could have been a bigger push. I don't know exactly how they broke down all of the marketing per region, but if I could posit one guess, it would be that they put a lot more of their marketing budget into domestic marketing as opposed to international marketing, and that's unfortunate, because to have 11 million domestic between the United States and Canada, that is, and 7 million outside the whole rest of the world. The populations of the United States and Canada comprising 11 million, and less than the equal amount the whole rest of the planet. That, I think, is a misstep. It continues. In its opening weekend, the film grossed $5.8 million, finishing in third. That is so unfortunate. Finishing in third place on opening weekend kind of was the writing on the wall to begin with. Sometimes a film like this might have a second life, like a second win, so to speak, but you really want to come out the gate strong, and finishing in third, not a great showing. This was attributed to limited demographic appeal, lackluster word of mouth, and a digital-centric advertisement campaign that failed to reach older audiences. Then they're nailing a lot of the things that I just said. If it was digitally centric, then it should have been way more widespread, and the older demographic, that should have been hit very hard. And again, I think it was the messaging there, because you are portraying this film as the mixed martial arts film when really it's a human story film. It takes place in Japan, but I didn't get the vibe the film took off in Japan. Well, yes, I think that we're finding that out point over point here at this point. But yeah, I mean, them not reaching the older demographic and it being digitally centric campaign is not that big of a deal to me. I think that there could have been a good amount of return off of a digital centric campaign for it, but the lack of word of mouth, we're going to get into those reasons once we get to the reviews that I'll be reacting to, and the limited demographic appeal, I think that is a faltering of the marketing, because if they had showcased the human connection as opposed to trying to portray this as the MMA movie, it would have connected a lot better. Because really what you would want to show this as is a human story first with the trappings of mixed martial arts, because that's really what it is. Johnson responded to the opening box office numbers with, "In our storytelling world, you can't control box office results, but what I realized you can control is your performance and your commitment to completely disappear and go elsewhere. And I will always run to that opportunity. Truth is, this film has changed my life." Well, that I certainly do think that he is warranted in saying. I think that he did a very fine job escaping into Mark Kerr. But all of that is the box office. The critical response is, I think, getting more to the core of what we are here to discuss, and will lead us right into the responses that we're going to be going over, and I'll explain them before we get to them. Critical response says, on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 70% of the 283 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, "Dwayne Johnson goes the distance with his transformative turn as Mark Kerr in The Smashing Machine, a gritty biopic that sidesteps cliche even at the expense of narrative satisfaction while still landing the dramatic body blows that count." I think that that's actually a pretty concise way of describing this film. Yeah, I don't know, actually, come to think of it, because I was going to say sidestepping cliches. I mean, you can say it sidestepped certain cliches, but at other turns, it's almost very cliche, because you have a tumultuous relationship that's worn territory at this point, right? I mean, how many films are about relationships that aren't great? A lot of them. That's what this movie is. You're dressing it differently, but it's still the same animal. At the expense of narrative satisfaction, again, I think we'll go into it deeper when we get into the reviews and responding to them, but I think that narrative satisfaction was one of the big criticisms that I had in the transition of this film from the original documentary to narrative film. I think that the opportunity to stay so focused on the source material almost deprived this film of narrative satisfaction. So anyway, that's what Rotten Tomatoes says. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 65 out of 100 based on 55 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. I think that 65% is extremely fair for this film. I think I gave it a 7 out of 10, 65 pretty close to that. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B- on an A+ to F scale. I think B- is about right as well. I think that that's pretty fair. You know, B- to C+ is about right. So that's the critical response. Of course, Safdie won a couple of awards here for this film. Fine. I think that is, I think that Benny Safdie is a director with vision. I just think that he misnavigated his application of that vision onto the source material, and that was a big fault here. But that is the overview of the critical. That is the overview of the critical reception. So let's get into some of these reviews. Now, I'm going to explain this a little bit. How we're going to do this is I have 3 reviews to go through with you today. One of them is from a person outside of the MMA world. And this is, I think, the most important criticism that we can listen to here. Because MMA fans are going to have a lot different opinions on this and a lot different perspective on this. So you have one review that is from someone outside of the MMA world, well seated in the film world. The second review that we have is from a person who is within the MMA sphere, but is not a fan who I think is familiar with the original documentary. So someone who is an MMA content creator, but not one who is as deeply versed in the sport or old enough to have been around in that era or aware of the original documentary and its connection to this film. And then the last review that we have is from what I would consider the MMA hardcores, and that would be people who are in the MMA world, MMA content creators, and MMA fans who are connected to the original documentary as well. I kind of tipped the hand on it. That one will be from MMA On Point. But starting off here, this is from a creator named Deep Focus Lens, pardon me. Deep Focus Lens. Now, I've seen the other two reviews from the MMA content creators. This review I have not watched all the way through, but when I went to preview it, I heard about the first 30 seconds of it, and instantly I said, this is the person that we need to hear from in order to find out what the non-MMA world thinks about this film. So let's begin with Deep Focus Lens and their review of The Smashing Machine. And I'll be pausing throughout to give my thoughts.
Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Smashing Machine. This was directed by Benny Safdie. The Safdie brothers as directors are quite well known among modern film fans, cinephiles. I would say that Benny Safdie is maybe the more visibly recognizable of the two because he's done maybe the more notable on-camera work. These guys are known for that kind of loose cinema verite style, but mixed with that more elevated, self-aware art house aesthetic. But this is the first time that Benny Safdie is directing a movie without his brother.
So, to begin, when I heard cinema verite, I was like, okay, this is who we need to hear from. This is a person who is a film person. This is not an MMA person. This is a narrative appreciator. So she's saying here that the Safdie brothers, generally working together. This is Benny Safdie's first directorial work outside of his collaborations with his brother. That's an interesting element of all of this, I think, underlying to everything. The Safdie brothers generally working together primarily, and now have gone in different directions. Benny directing this film, and his brother, I believe it's Josh Safdie, I think is his brother's name, is directing the upcoming movie about table tennis with Timothy Chalamet. So convergence there. But I think that what she's saying here is generally correct, that they do have a somewhat cinema verite style. If you're not familiar with cinema verite, that is more grounded cinema, that cinema of truth, they say. Basically, kind of allowing narratives to be gritty, real, and grounded, as opposed to fanciful, over the top, and whimsical, so to speak. So I think that she's off to a good start with this assessment here, and this is a good framing for it, saying that this is the convergence between the two brothers.
Obviously, Marty Supreme is coming out later this year, directed by Benny Safdie, so I think it'll be interesting to compare and contrast the two, see how these two differ as artists.
So yeah, that Marty Supreme is the movie that I just referenced there, and that's coming out from Josh Safdie. She misspoke there, as the text said.
But here we have The Smashing Machine, and this is about a mixed martial artist, former UFC star Mark Kerr. And for those of you who watch me regularly or maybe follow me on social media, that kind of stuff, you probably know that I am a huge UFC fan.
What?
So I was
Wait a second. I don't know if she's being I don't know if she's being sarcastic here or not, but if that is the case, that is really funny because she had me completely fooled. I would not have taken this person for an MMA fan based on that introduction. So already poking holes in the concept here, but we'll hear her out. We already started.
I was kind of interested in this movie because I thought of all the different UFC fighters or the aspects of fighting that you could make a movie about, why make it about Mark Kerr? Obviously nothing against him. It seemed like a curious choice to me. But now that I have seen the movie, it makes all the sense in the world why they chose him, just because I think this is more an analysis of a certain type of human being, and Mark Kerr as a character kind of acts as the symbol for that.
I think that's a pretty sound point. First of all, I do want to address that overarching point about why Mark Kerr. This is something that will come up several times here in this set of analyses. Why Mark Kerr is because of the original documentary. The middling review that we're going to watch, I felt myself screaming that at the screen as I watched it initially. So Yeah, that is why that is the case. There is a source material for this, but I do think she's making a good point in saying that it is a representation of the type of fighter from the era and things that might have been more prevalent than than what was on the surface in the Pride days. Mark Kerr, one that was put forth in the documentary, so that became public. But in general, probably a lot of similar stories to this that maybe were not as broadly represented in media. I know, bro. Yeah, you got to be kidding me. That, like, how did that happen, right? I swear, I saw when I heard her talk about cinema verite, I was like, "There's no way. This has to be the right choice." But I cannot believe that I ended up getting duped by the 30 seconds that I watched in this the preview of this. But either way, we will continue. She looks like Queen Joanna. John Queen Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She does look a little bit like Joanna. Shout out to Nav. Looks like she has liver failure. Wait, what? All right. Anyway, let's continue.
The juxtaposition in a fighter of like the most primal animalistic form of competition there is, but that it exists in such a conditioned, civilized modern era, I think that's quite fascinating just from a cerebral perspective. These guys are the closest thing to gladiators we can come up with in a sense, but what makes a person capable of all that vicious type of violence while also finding that gentility, the balance in everyday life? It's like what makes somebody want to slug it out, and as soon as the match is over, you shake hands and hope the person is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on, right? That's the human element of the core character of Mark Kerr, which is why the original documentary was so compelling. That was the anchor of the original documentary, was seeing the humanity of Mark Kerr mixed with the brutality of the sport. So, yeah, I think she's hitting all the points right now.
A lot of fighters tend to be type A, and they're more driven by a sense of like urgency over self-analysis, and that makes all the sense in the world. But there's also that masculine need, I think, to repress certain emotions, not deal with them. But in doing so, that means some of the most vulnerable, important emotions go unchecked, and then they're just going to build and build and build. And in such an uncompromising sport such as fighting, that can be really rough mentally. And so,
yeah, I mean, I guess that is a good point there, too. And I would say then, if that is one of the factors that went into choosing this as source material, then I think that the narrative version of the film did a decent job of doing that, because you did see Mark Kerr exploding in certain instances. You did see the emotion overtaking him in a way that was not in the original documentary. There probably could have been more scenes, not necessarily like that specifically to show him breaking things or going into psycho mode kind of things, but just more confliction in his emotional state might have heightened that a little bit if that was the aim. Now, I don't know how much of that actually was true to life, because we didn't see that in the original documentary. But I would think that if you're going to be fleshing out with some elements of embellishment on the reality of the original source material, then maybe that could have been a little bit more heightened, because we only got glimpses of it in a few scenes, one key scene pretty much, but a couple of other minor instances. But really, Mark Kerr has a pretty even temper throughout most of the film, aside from select instances with Dawn. Rick Allen says it's not that great. Rock's performance is solid, but overall average movie. Well, I mean, this is what we're getting to the bottom to right here, right now, Rick. So stick around and we'll continue to make that point.
Yes, in that sense, Mark Kerr is a great choice, because like Daniel Cormier, he has a smile that warms everybody to him, lights up a room. It's infectious. So how does somebody find that gentility while also having that viciousness in them? To me, Safdie is trying to answer all of these questions while also being able to frame it in a more accessible way, a more Hollywood type of way. Does he succeed? No. And that's just my opinion, but I kind of think the problem is, yes, he is known for that more cinema verite artistic style, like I mentioned, but he just doesn't know how to merge it with more that biopic framing. It's like
I mean, look, again, I thought that she was not an MMA person when she came out with DC just there. I was like, oh, she really is an MMA person, so she was not trolling. But Either way, she is nailing this analysis right now. I mean, that right there just said all that you need to know. Because again, she's not framing it in the terms of the the documentary. She's not framing it in the documentary terms. She's framing it just as a biopic based on the source material being real life. And she's completely correct. It's taking the reality of Mark Kerr and elevating it into a grander narrative that is the ultimate failing of this film. So I think that the elements that she's portraying here about, the duality of a character like Mark Kerr, who has such a calm and friendly demeanor, being juxtaposed with the brutality of mixed martial arts and that convergence, she's correct in the sense that that does not equal up to a satisfying narrative the way that it's presented in this film. So this turned out to be a really good choice, even if it wasn't exactly as intended.
He's trying to find all these psychological aspects of a character through a type of filmmaking that doesn't lend itself to exploring said psychology. And the intention just doesn't feel there like it does with so many of those pressure cooker films that the Safdies have done in the past. A movie like Good Time, as an example. That is by far my favorite Safdie film. And just talk about kinetic. But when I look at this movie, it just feels flat on the page. It feels like imitation art house.
So, okay, two things there. One, I agree with her about the assessment of the style of this film being flat. That was something that I don't think that I really fully expressed in my assessment during our review necessarily, but I kind of did in a roundabout way, in the sense of saying that it's just information presented very linearly, point over point. You get what you need in a very standard, by the book, this, just the facts, ma'am, kind of manner. What I would also say, though, is that when she's saying that the framework doesn't work for it, I don't think that that's the case. I think that there could have been better selections of heightening elements to make it more of what the tone that she's saying they were wanting to get across could have been. I think that there were opportunities to do that. It just wasn't. They didn't select them. It just wasn't. They just didn't do those things that were needed to make this story more resonant. So I do think that she's correct in the overall assessment of the tone, but I don't think that it's correct to say that a movie like this could not have had more of that analysis, the duality analysis in it. It just wasn't accomplished here.
The script feels kind of all over the place. It's like you've got our main character, and he has several important factors in his life. The drug addiction, as an example, learning to cope with major losses, and also the struggles with his girlfriend in his relationship. But none of those elements converge in a way that escalates the tension. They all feel like these strange, dangling, undeveloped plot threads that don't really serve anything in the story.
That's a mixed bag as far as I'm concerned. I think that I can't really agree with that, because it is true to the reality of the situation. I mean, this is what was presented in the documentary. This was the reality of this man's life at the time. So, and to think that the story was all over the place is an interesting assessment to me, because it's not all over the place in any way. It's very, very small and compact. Like, it would be one thing if there was some random character or random plot point that comes out of nowhere, but there isn't. That could have been something that might have spiced up the things that she's saying are lacking in the film. Oh, this guy coming in from out of nowhere, or, this thing happening that was unexpected. But there's none of that. It's very down the line. Mark Kerr is in a bad relationship. He has a drug problem. He overdoses. He has to fight in this tournament. He doesn't do well in tournament. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are all very linear, progressional things, beat by beat by beat. So to think that this story was all over the place doesn't really track to me, because I would say, if anything, it's too in place. It's too rigidly connected as far as the sequence of events.
Other than just checking off the typical biopic beats, you get all of the typical scenes. Of course, the big yelling scene with the girlfriend where she throws a plate and it smashes all over the place, or the scene in the hospital where there's a big intervention in the crying. It's also curated and convenient, and it goes completely against every single experience I have ever had watching a Safdie film.
So, I mean, I think she just contradicted herself then by saying that, because she's sort of making the point that I just made after the point that she had said about it being all over the place. So I think that that's a bit of a misstep, but she's right in that. I mean, what she just said is more correct. I mean, it is beat by beat by beat.
It's like usually when I'm watching them, I'm so locked in and it's like the tension builds as the acts build. But here, once we got to the third act, I felt I was completely disassociated. There are a few reasons for that. Number one, they kind of use the relationship between Mark and his best friend and training partner as the catalyst for that tension where they're going to have to face each other in the finale. But the relationship is so underdeveloped that emotionally it doesn't make sense for this to be the big, exciting climax. And poor Emily Blunt, I felt bad for her just because the character here is so underutilized. She's doing a great job with what she has. And, obviously she's a great actress, a great star, all those things. And I was quite interested in her character and the mechanism that is her relationship and why she loves this man. But it feels more like, as an audience member, we are a fly on the wall to all of their repetitive spats. Just
Okay. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, I kind of see what she's saying about Coleman and Kerr. Again, going back to the source material, this is the true to life story. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, unless you really made the very bold narrative leap to have them actually face each other in the end, which would have been completely contradictory to real life, but could have been a more interesting fictionalization of the story, perhaps. I would not have been for that. I think that that would have been a major point in our conversation between me and Chase when we were reviewing the film, if that had been the case. But I can kind of see what she's saying about that not being overly satisfying. That was one of the points that I had made. And I think that a big part of that, again, goes back to the steadfast adherence to the source material. Because Coleman in this movie is such a monotone character. And I mean, it works in certain ways and it doesn't. I said very even-keeled character. So it's like you don't have any kind of great dramatic tension, even in the sense of like the finale when Mark finally loses and Coleman wins. It ends up falling kind of flat because the tone is just down the line. So I can see that being a little like from the perspective that she's taking, where it's like, they're setting this up as this big problem and then it doesn't end up happening. And that kind of makes it not narratively satisfying. I can see that element of it being the case for an average viewer, even if they had known the reality of what happened between them because of the presentation. What's key to note about Dawn? What's key to note about Dawn movie versus real life Dawn? Had a moment where you noticed, oh shit, she's batshit crazy. In the movie, she's always just off the rails from early in the movie. Never felt her heel turn from loving girlfriend to sinister bitch. Yeah. She definitely was overbearing from the beginning in the movie. Because I think that between what you just said, Chase, and what this lady here is saying, I think that there's somewhere in the middle that makes the most sense. Because I do agree with this woman that, Emily Blunt is doing a good job portraying that character, and she very closely resembles Dawn from real life. But yeah, there probably should have been a little bit more progression. Like, because you get it. You're right. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of The Smashing Machine, the first interaction in the narrative film between Mark and Dawn is a scene where Mark Kerr is coming into the kitchen, exiting the bedroom into the common area of the house, and Dawn is making a shake for him. And Mark is kind of like saying thank you for doing it, but saying that she didn't do it correctly. And I think that they were kind of I guess what I'm trying to say is that like they didn't set up Dawn to not like to have the arc that you're talking about, not because they didn't want to ramp it up, but more so because they thrust the conflict of their relationship into the spotlight too early in the film to begin with. They should have started out more with like basically leading up to the scene in the gym where Dawn is stretching him out and they have that little, kind of flirtatious stretching session while Mark is working out. There should have been, between the beginning of the film and that point, a common area of them being loving and more cohesive unit. because that would have led to a better fracturing later on. So you are definitely correct that I do think that there was a misstep in putting information out there too early. Again, it was pretty common to real life. And I mean, you're saying that you didn't think that that was that way in the documentary. I would agree. I mean, like the documentary, up until a very specific point of the documentary, I thought that Dawn was a great girl. You know, I mean, like I was like, I said that in our review of the documentary. It's like up until a very specific moment, it was like Dawn really was great. So yeah, that is an interesting divergence from the documentary in a way then, because it's like you're going so close to reality with everything, but then taking that one critical piece that you're basically building your entire movie on and having that smashed into your face from the second the film starts. So I guess in a roundabout way, I'm agreeing with both you and this woman here, Chase. Hey, Sigma, how you doing, brother? Yamagoat, Sigma Goat, my man. Appreciate you, bro.
Over and over again, and they don't really lead anywhere. And then finally, when she has her big moment of weakness later on, because she is so underdeveloped, it felt jarring in the story. And I'm not going to get into it because it's spoilers, but that section diverts from the rest of the film, but it opens up this whole new can of worms. But then they just kind of cut it off there, and she is, yes, reduced to another plot device.
So, I mean, full spoilers here. You know that me and Chase have gone over every aspect of the Smashing Machine at this point. If you want spoiler-free stuff, go somewhere else. She's referring to Dawn's suicide attempt. That is, when Dawn goes off the rails, she takes the gun, puts the gun to her head. She starts trying to down pills. She's going off the rails there. I don't know. It's tough because we didn't see that actually happen in the documentary, so this is the dramatization of it. The story is almost too grounded because that could have been a much bigger, more over-the-top element that did serve a better narrative function, but I kind of do agree with her assessment based on what she's saying, where it's like, yeah, it's just another plot point because it doesn't come out of nowhere. We see it building over time. I mean, Dawn is being relegated to the sidelines. She doesn't feel that she's an important piece of Mark's life. She wants to be closer to him, and she feels that he's not letting her in, even though it would seem that he is trying to. So it seems like there's just a disconnect between the two of them, even though they both want to be stronger connected. And so when it all bubbles over in that scene, it does have a bit of a crescendo because it is like a kind of a dramatic, tense moment. It involves Mark having to break down a door dramatically. So, I mean, like there are dramatic elements to it, but from a narrative perspective in this very, very grounded, very steadily paced film, it could have had more. Like there could have been a bigger bigger narrative function to that element of it. Like that plot piece could have been more dramatically heightened in order to give it the gravitas that element of the film needed, considering that this film is very much lacking in gravitas.
As the typical crazy girlfriend. I feel like I should talk about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson because obviously this is his vehicle and he sees this movie clearly as a ticket to propel him into a different, type of filmmaking, a different type of persona where he can play more complex roles. And overall, I do think this is a very good role for him, a good step in the right direction. He has a charm to him, but it's very removed. It feels kind of like a politician, but he was able to soften that here. And I could tell it's like he really cared about wanting to get to the soul of who Mark really is. And there are many moments in the film where you can feel him, frustrated, struggling with trying to be calm and rational, but then also he could blow a fuse at any moment.
I agree with her in that assessment of The Rock's performance, yet that was something that both myself and Chase agreed with in our review, that didn't feel like a one-to-one of the actual Mark Kerr that we got in the documentary. Because Mark in the documentary never seemed to have all of those conflicts of trying to hold back. I mean, very, very, very infrequently and maybe in small, minor flecks. But it was very rare that you ever saw Mark having to be like, bearing down but keep his cool. Like even when he was negotiating with the Japanese, he never really got to that point. There were, times with Dawn where he never really got to that point. there really were not a lot of them. I mean, maybe you could say that in one or two instances there was a time where it was like, yeah, maybe he might have possibly been holding something back, but we really didn't see all of that much from him in the original documentary. So that was certainly something that was heightened for the narrative. And if that's, we kind of speculated that that was intentional, and it could have been more true to real life than what the documentary had shown. So if that's the case, then I do agree. I think The Rock did a good job with that.
There's a moment that I really liked where they're out by the pool and Emily Blunt hands him a knife and
Ah,
he slowly cuts off part of a cactus plant in the backyard. He speaks with this irritation, this frustration in his voice towards her, and the whole time he is holding the knife. But he gently gives it back to her. But it's that undercurrent of fear, that edge, will he or won't he, that I think is quite interesting, and they needed so much more of that.
so the knife scene in the original documentary is, I think, one of the most beautifully portrayed pieces of art in all of documentary filmmaking. I was very clear about that in my portion of the review that Chase and I did about the documentary. When it comes to the scene in the film, I don't think that there was any real underlying tension to think that he was going to do anything aside from handing it back to her politely. That could be me knowing the documentary, but I guess if she's saying that there was a will he, won't he aspect to it, then maybe that was more heightened in a narrative sense, and maybe that's a more of a positive thing from the film version of this story. So I say that all to say that if that worked for the film and she thought that they needed to do more of that, then that's a fair criticism. However, I think that what we'll hear in, I believe, in the last review that we'll be going over, and what I would agree with, is that the true reality in the documentary speaks its own volumes so much more strongly than the narrative version of this film that it almost doesn't matter, like, if you know the documentary. Granted, a lot of people don't, so that's fine, and I wish more people would know both. But if that was an element that she thought was improving of the, on the narrative portion of the film, then I think that that was a positive in the general sense. But go back and watch the documentary and see how it actually went down in real life, and you can see the difference.
In this movie. My only issue with the Rock performance, as strong as it is, it doesn't quite lock in place so far as I don't sense the pain and the melancholy in his eyes, the complexity that is Mark Kerr. I mean, there is a cameo by the real Mark Kerr in this film. And of course, he's got that great smile, all that, but it's like, no, you see the weariness, the pain in his eyes. It's quite evident right there. Just didn't come through for me with The Rock, and so much didn't come through for me in the movie.
I don't think I agree with that. I think The Rock channeled that well enough. Yeah, I mean, I really don't have too much else to say about that aspect of it. I think that The Rock did a fine enough job with that portion of it. Again, I think that there are certain elements that could have been fleshed out differently in order to achieve more of that underlying pain, if that's what it actually is, which I would assume that that's correct. Like the intervention scene. I had a lot to say about that one in the review. I think that that could have been an area where the emotion could have bubbled over in a better way. And then there probably are a couple of other moments in the film that may have heightened it a little bit stronger. But I don't necessarily think that The Rock didn't portray that well enough. I think that overall it was pretty well communicated. So much pain in his eyes while grocery shopping and breaks the fourth wall. Yeah, exactly. That's another good point, too. It's like, I mean, I assume that she's talking about knowing Mark Kerr from before that. And like, if she really is just going straight off of the end of the film and that portion of seeing the real life Mark Kerr, then yeah, I mean, you could say that he does have like kind of like sympathetic eyes. So like when he's greeting the cashier, he does kind of have like that, like, hey, how you doing? Like sort of like calm, pleasant, but like still a little bit like drifting away sort of thing. But that doesn't necessarily signal pain to me. So I don't know. I don't necessarily full on agree with her on that.
The movie did feel boring after a while, and the editing felt just off. Certain scenes, like I'd mentioned before, feel repetitive or like they don't go anywhere interesting. And another thing I noticed is this movie doesn't seem that interested in fighting, which is okay, but it's like, then why make, the climax of the movie associated with fighting?
So, I mean, again, this is like, even if she is a mixed martial arts fan, and does not capture the non MMA fan portion of what we were trying to accomplish here, that I think is still a very big element of the average viewing audience that makes a lot of sense. I can completely understand a non MMA person finding this film to be boring because you're not getting the fight world, and you're getting a lot more of the relationship world. We've seen relationships before. Lots of films have fractured relationships. Lots of films have stories with hardship and drug abuse and these kinds of things. So for her to say that it wasn't satisfying to have a fight related conclusion does somewhat track, because fighting is not the central theme of this. Of course, again, knowing that there is a source material that this sticks so closely to, we understand that. But from a general viewing public perspective, I can understand that assessment. What was worse, Smashing Machine or Roadhouse? Oh, Roadhouse is certainly much worse than Smashing Machine. Come on, man. I mean, Roadhouse is, well, I guess it depends on what you're looking for in a movie, right? If you're looking for popcorn, goofball, kind of entertainment, high concept kind of thing, then Roadhouse is better. But if you're looking for solid storytelling as opposed to, just kind of turn your brain off entertainment, then The Smashing Machine is a much more artfully presented film, even if it is a small and standard story. Roadhouse, to be honest, and I like that a lot. Yeah, exactly. I also like Roadhouse. And of course, keep your eyes out for MMA on Film, because I guarantee you that Roadhouse will come up at some point. Connor butt acting over Rock butt acting. I mean, both in different ways. I thought that The Rock was a very good actor, though. I just was talking about that. Safdie should have put that line in the movie. Mark Kerr says, "I hope you're having a smashing evening," before he headbutts his opponent. Is that that's like a Joker line? That's like one of those like lines that like Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia would like have to throw in the script, A good zinger line. Yeah, a good zinger line might have elevated this, perhaps. Maybe that's what this film was missing, was a good zinger line. A good roll credits line as far as CinemaSins would be concerned.
Again, so many of the elements in this movie feel like an afterthought or something that is tacked on, and it's not in step with everything else. So yeah, this just wasn't it for me. I'm sorry. I don't recommend this. I would say maybe stream it if you like really great performances. Sure, it's interesting to see The Rock in this performance, and it's interesting to see Emily Blunt as well. But yeah, I don't know. This felt disconnected, second rate, and just mismanaged. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well.
All right, so there you go. Made sure to get her plugs in there, and I very much appreciate her review. Her not recommending it, again, even if she is an MMA fan, I still think that it accomplishes what we were looking for from the average viewer, because I think that she hit a lot of the points that the average viewing public would have. A story that is kind of paint by numbers, a story that she essentially ended up getting bored with, one that she would not recommend. I mean, when going back to what the Wikipedia article had said, saying that the word of mouth campaign was not very strong for this film, that's why. That's really why. I mean, it really comes down to the storytelling. Again, knowing that there was the documentary, you understand the connection there, but that was my big point in my review, and my portion of our review, saying that there needed to be a heightening of the narrative in order for this to get more of a satisfaction for the average viewer. the older crowd that they were saying were not properly marketed to needed something more in order for them to connect with these characters beyond just life is tough. You know, it goes back to also our review of Bruised, the Halle Berry film. You know, you needed to have more than just life sucks and I really need to win this fight, which is all that movie ended up being. Life is not great. Life is not great. Life is not great. I need to fight and win. Then what happens, happens. Watch our review of Bruised, by the way. So anyway, that is Deep Focus Lenses review here. I appreciate that very much. Shout out to her. Her website is deepfocuslens.com if you want any of her work. Next up, we're going to be watching Vampiric Legs' review of this film. Now, this is a longer one, so I'm probably going to let this run a little bit longer at points, but we're going to get through it because I think that he makes a lot of points from the MMA fan perspective, more so than that woman. Obviously, she might be a passing MMA fan. That's a casual, basically. And no, I don't use it in an offensive way when it comes to her. That's a fan of the sport to an extent. Not, you know, this is a content creator in this space. Obviously, he's following the sport. He's more keyed into the current era of the sport, but he's a younger guy, as you can see, and he's not familiar with the documentary. So I think that there is a lot of value in his review as well. We'll get into that in just a second. Let's see. Yeah, I know she didn't recommend. Kind of wild, you know. It was really good. She liked good, like she liked it. Then boom, 0 out of 10. Do not share. I mean, I know. I think that she made a lot of good points, though. I think she made a lot of good points about like why it would not be a recommendation. She did say that you could stream it, so you know. But you know, to say that it's not a narratively satisfying film, again, from a non-MMA fan perspective and people who are not aware of the documentary, I could see that as a valid criticism, that it's very standard, down the line, beat, nothing really out of the ordinary happens, and then it just ends, and then you end up with the fourth wall break, and maybe that'll turn some people off. So there's a lot of reasons why I think that that's a valid review of the film. And again, a very non, like, in this world person's perspective, a civilian, so to speak. She was super involved in telling us what she liked about the film and jumped right into telling motherfuckers not to watch this or the original. She didn't say anything about the original. Yeah, no. She definitely did not see the original documentary. That's why we specifically wanted to choose a person like that. I mean, she was familiar with Mark Kerr, so I mean, I guess that she at least knew that much, but did not seem that she had seen the source material, which is going to be similar with this dude, Vampiric Legs, who I would think a couple of you guys might know about, considering that he's a bigger channel than Yama. But I recommend Vampiric Legs. He's very funny. He's got a very distinct voice and delivery style, very unique. And he's, you know, his editing is pretty funny as well. So I am a fan of Vampiric Legs, but I think his review is very interesting. His review is actually what inspired me to want to do this stream tonight. Also, after hearing her, we talked about that. I'll stop because I may be getting into hater territory. No, I think it's valid, bro. It's definitely, but it's only valid from your perspective. And I think that that's what you have to keep in mind. We're looking for a non-fight person. So even though she was a fight person, that was not accomplished. I think that a lot of the criticisms are the same as what you would have gotten from someone outside of the MMA world. Why do the true UFC fans look like this? He looks like me with glasses. Yeah, bro. He looks like Michael C. Or no, Arch Hall Jr. a little bit. Old school actor. They don't seem to pull Mark Kerr documentary before the film's release. What do you think about it? Or they seemed to pull Mark Kerr's documentary before the film's release. Why not promote the doc instead of de-streaming it? Was it available for streaming somewhere before the release? Oh, it used to be on Fight Pass and then they took it off. Oh, that's an interesting note. I did not know that. There might have been some type of rights issues with that. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that, because you would think that they would want as many people as possible to see the documentary before the film. And if I think that people not having known the original documentary was a big detriment to this film because of how close it was. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe that there was some type of rights thing with the new film, that maybe that was in the contract, that they didn't want the documentary potentially leeching viewership from the new film. That doesn't really make sense to me. So I don't know the answer, honestly, there. That is very strange. What I would have thought is that they would have wanted it in as many places as they could have had it. They should have had it on ESPN Plus. Limited, mark it as a 30 for 30 and put it out again, or re-release it that way, or whatever, however you want to do it. But put it on HBO Max, put it on Paramount Plus now that UFC is going over there. I would have thought that they would have wanted that documentary out in as many places as possible to get the original story out there. I think it would have been a massive boost to the film, not necessarily for the general public, but more so for people who maybe for MMA fans, because even if you're an MMA fan, again, we're going to get to Vampiric Legs here. A person like this probably would have benefited from seeing the original documentary before making their full-on assessment of the film. And if you are not an MMA fan and watch the documentary, then definitely I think it would have heightened the experience. I just don't think that a lot of non-MMA fans would have even taken the time to watch the original. So. Just noticed the title of this guy's video. He might be pretty funny. Yeah. No, he is definitely funny. Yeah. Vampiric Legs is very funny. I'm a fan of his. All right. Let's hear what he's got to say.
I just got back from the movie theater, and this is a The Smashing Machine movie review. Let's get right to it, because I had really high hopes for this movie. Benny Safdie is an excellent director. A24 as a studio is phenomenal. I'm looking at my notes right now. Beef, Euphoria, Lady Bird, Hereditary, Midsummer, The Lighthouse, Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Whale, right? These are award-winning movies. These are phenomenal movies. Everything A24 does is usually pretty good, very artsy.
So, starting off, this, I think, was a misstep of the marketing for sure. Pushing it as an A24 film probably would have done a lot better. Like, they should have splashed that A24 logo on every piece of marketing. That should have been a big, bold statement for a lot of the marketing of this film, because he's right. I mean, the fact that it is an A24 film at all, when you have that studio releasing a project, you have a certain expectation of the style that comes with. And I don't know how many people actually knew that this was A24, because I think that if it was more widely known that this was an A24 film, the expectations of it might have been a little bit more true to what the product was.
And they want to kind of keep that indie film vibe, and they want to throw a bunch of money behind it and let artists really, put everything they want into a movie without restrictions. But while also not having, a whole lot of creative control like a Paramount or Lionsgate or whatever the fuck. Any big studio that wants to kind of meddle in stuff. They want to leave artists, they want to just let them kind of do their thing, which I can respect. But it doesn't go too well in this movie, in my opinion, because again, you're looking at Benny Safdie and you're thinking like Uncut Gems is another one, and I think that might be his best movie. Did he win an award? I want to say he almost won an award, but Joker was just better that year. But Uncut Gems was phenomenal, and he took another actor that had been kind of not taken too seriously in Adam Sandler, and he put him in a serious role, and Adam kind of knocked it out of the park there. And I don't think The Rock is necessarily bad, but it's not an Uncut Gems Adam Sandler level performance from him this time,
Yeah, so I mean that I think is a good point. Like, the element of the Safdie brothers that the previous commentator that we watched was commenting on. They have a rhythm to their films that's very paced at this is so much slower than their other films. Uncut Gems is a great example of it. Uncut Gems is a film that is tense from the second it starts to the end of the film. I think it is an insane exercise in dramatic tension being held for the entire runtime of a film. If you have not seen Uncut Gems, highly recommend that movie. It is fantastic. That is your homework if you have not seen Uncut Gems. And that was my introduction to the Safdie brothers. So, I think that he makes a good point here that the level of narrative unfolding, the pacing of the film, is a big detriment here, especially compared to the other works that people might have been familiar with the Safdie brothers. They have a pace that they keep in those films that really keeps you on the edge of your seat. This film does not keep you on the edge of your seat in the slightest. When he's talking about The Rock, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that it's apples and oranges because the character that Adam Sandler portrays in Uncut Gems is so different than Mark Kerr. So I again, this is coming from the perspective of a person who is an MMA fan, but not a person who is familiar with the documentary.
Another A24 movie that we can kind of draw from is The Iron Claw with Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White, about the Von Erich family. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I said, if it's anything like that, it's another A24 combat sports adjacent movie. If it's anything like that, it'll be great. It'll be phenomenal. And I thought there was enough overlap, again, with the storytelling to where they could maybe get some of that done, but not quite. Not quite. And that's a high bar because, again, Iron Claw is one of my favorite movies. I think a top 10, maybe pushing into that top 5 range.
I think that this is a very, very astute observation. The Iron Claw accomplishes a lot of what the Smashing Machine probably should have wanted to achieve. And they did it by tweaking the reality of the Von Erich's life. Like, there was an entire Von Erich brother that I believe had to get cut out of the storytelling for pacing and narrative purposes. Like, it was, something that like hardcore fans of wrestling probably would have noticed and probably had some opinions about. But from a narrative storytelling perspective, it made sense. That film also moved in a progression that was satisfying. That was one that had dramatic tension and release. That was one that had character interactions that were satisfying. And also drawing from real life elements, but still fictionalizing it well enough to the point where it was its own product. That was a big point from the review with me and Chase, was that I was like, you are taking the documentary and just fictionalizing it, but not in a satisfying way. You're too close to the source material without being a one-to-one remake, to the point that it feels uncanny valley in a way that's not satisfying, even if you know the original documentary. It should have been more like The Iron Claw. And so really, I think that was a very, very prescient point by Vampiric Legs to bring that up, because if it had been more along the lines of The Iron Claw, this conversation would be dramatically different.
But it's just not quite there. Biopics are kind of weird for me because a lot of times, especially if they end up doing the prosthetics like they did this time, it ends up in that uncanny valley, right? Where it's like, that's The Rock. I can tell it's The Rock. He's not really changing his voice to sound like Mark Kerr. He just sounds like The Rock with a bunch of makeup on. And I would prefer if they kind of just let it be. Zac Efron, he didn't really look like Kevin Von Erich. He got jacked for the role. He did all the good stuff. They put a wig on him. It was all good. Same with Jeremy Allen White in that movie. But, it didn't go into that weird realm. I would rather you just not look like him at all and just wear a wig. Again, Jeremy Allen White in Born to Run, the Bruce Springsteen movie that they're doing is like, okay, cool. What's his name? Chalamet in fucking in Born to Run, the Bob Dylan one. Not Born to Run, the Bob Dylan one. A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan movie, right? That kind of thing.
I agree with him entirely on this, and this is probably something that I should have stressed a little bit more. We did talk about this, though, with Bas Rutten playing himself, Ryan Bader not looking anything like Mark Coleman. That I do think would have been a big help here, but this is also only for people who have that as in their mind something that is a problem, I would say. Because The Rock being in the prosthetics and stuff, I do think in the big picture it was kind of unnecessary considering how big he got for the role. He certainly nailed the physique. I mean, he could not have been more true to life in his size, in his muscular stature and all of that. It was unnecessary. It was unnecessary to go that route. when other characters in the film are so different than who they're playing. Like, why is Mark Kerr the only person that has to go through the transformation in his face as far as the character goes to make The Rock look more like him, when, I mean, Emily Blunt looks enough like Dawn. Like, I don't think that that was too much of a thing, but Coleman, that's the bigger one. You know, I mean, Coleman, Igor Vovchanchyn, and Alexander Usyk, I mean, they don't look anything alike. I mean, there was like weird pieces of that. I kind of touched on that a little bit with the Bas Rutten thing, because it's like Bas playing himself, like, it throws the entire thing into this weird uncanny valley territory where you've got one person who is, they're attempting to make look like another person. You've got one person who's himself as an older person. You've got this guy who's a mixed martial artist playing another mixed martial artist. You know, it just became a little bit convoluted from a visual standpoint, unnecessarily. I think that he is exactly right here in saying that if The Rock had just done away with all of that prosthetic stuff, it would have been just fine. It would have worked exactly the same, and The Rock still could have portrayed the character correctly.
Part of me thinks that if The Rock, you know, if he didn't wear any makeup, then it would just be The Rock. But he's wearing enough makeup to where it kind of looks like Mark, but it's still The Rock, and it ends up in kind of a weird place for me. And I think The Rock's performance doesn't necessarily help. Like, it's good. It's a good dramatic performance, and The Rock has gotten better as an actor over time. He kind of peaked a little bit with, like, those mid-2010 roles, like Central Intelligence is what I think of. And I think of, like, Skyscraper and Fast and Furious and all that. And I'm like, he's playing the same guy in every movie. Jumanji, where it's like, oh, he's a big tough guy with a heart of gold, just like the regular Rock. And the whole not losing fights in movies things gave him kind of a bad rap, so he loses fights in this movie, but he kind of had to.
You see, now this is one that's interesting to me in general, is that we get a lot of people criticizing The Rock's performance. Like, this is what it was supposed to be. I don't understand that criticism specifically, where it's like, oh, The Rock did an okay job. No, The Rock did a really good job. I mean, like, it was just what they were trying to portray with the character that was not, that, you know, that was the bigger issue to me. I thought The Rock, like, what was on the page, it seemed to me that The Rock was delivering well. It was the page itself that was the weakness there. So, I mean, you know, this guy is coming from the perspective of seeing him in all of those other films, and then this being the big transition into dramatic work. I guess I can get that. But, like, again, knowing who Mark Kerr actually was versus what we saw in the 2025 film, I thought it all added up pretty well. So again, this is coming from a person who did not see that documentary. Almost as if they didn't ask him to go full Mark Kerr, but Rick decided to pay out of pocket for the makeup deal. Rick? Which Rick? Rick Allen? Hey, Hydra, how are you, sir? Good to see you, brother. But yeah, no, I mean, oh, The Rock, got you. I was like, wait, what, Rick? Yeah, no, it seemed like an odd choice based on everything else that was going on, for sure. See, there you go. Hydra knows Vampiric Legs. Yeah, he's definitely very funny, and we're going through his review of The Smashing Machine to pick the pieces out that give us a better understanding of why this film failed with audiences.
And, you know, it's hard to separate him from this movie because this is kind of his baby. You know, he really wanted to do this. He's wanted to do this since 2019. It's been in production hell since 2019, bouncing around from studios, losing funding, regaining funding, bunch of stuff like that, you know. And a couple of people said, like, why are they making a Mark Kerr movie? He's not really that important. Me personally, I think he's like a little bit important, and he has a story. If someone's not important, they can still have a good story and you can still make a biopic about them. However, this has some issues.
Two things. One, he's saying that this is The Rock's baby. This was Benny Safdie's baby, because Benny Safdie is the writer, director, and editor of this film. So all of those things that he's talking about with production hell and all that, The Rock might have still been attached to it, and it's very good that The Rock was as passionate about this project as Benny Safdie was. So maybe you can say that they were co-parents of this film, but to think that it was just The Rock pushing this, no. This was Benny Safdie's doing. He made this happen in a big way, and I commend him for that. The steadfast determination to make this film happen was solely placed on him. I would not so look, like I said, The Rock as well. Fine, the two of them together, at least in 50% placed on him, if not more so than that. I would probably say closer to 80% than 50. So Benny Safdie is really the big champion of this film, but it is good of The Rock to have been as interested in this project. So that's number one. Number two, about Mark Kerr. As a person who might not be familiar with the documentary, this is a valid criticism from the average MMA fan. I think that the way he says it is actually really spot on. Mark is a little bit important, but compared to Fedor, compared to Sakuraba, other legends of that era, compared to Royce Gracie, it's hard to make the case. But that's without the context of the documentary. I do have Rock fatigue because he did play the same character in all of his movies besides Smashing Machine, but I can see that he actually tried and went against his never lose a fight clause or whatever. Yes, no, I mean, if that was legitimately a clause, I heard him talk about that and I didn't really know what he was referencing there. If that was a real thing in his contract, then yes, this was a much more vulnerable performance, and it was necessary that he had to lose fights in this film. The film would have been very, very different if he had never lost a fight. But that was central to the character, so him wanting to portray that was integral. But I can understand Rock fatigue as well. We talked about that on one of the free-for-all streams. Not to brag, Thinker, but I was late to the stream rushing home from a girl's dorm. My man. Brother. High five, my dude. Whoever in chat said just talk to girls was right. Hydra, yo. Where's the fuck? Oh, yeah. I don't have it up right now because I didn't think I would need it, but I do have the ability to play it, so give me a quick moment here. Let that load. There's your... Why'd it go away? There we go. Okay. There you go. Yes. There you go. Sirens for Hydra. Congratulations, sir. A+ on masculinity. Didn't think Kerr needed a movie. I think Pride needs a movie. That was another criticism that I had heard from a number of people who are familiar with the era, and this could have been that. And we had talked about that, I think, a little in the review. Is that there might have been more of an ability to make it the Pride movie. In fact, I think that the original documentary kind of does a decent job of being the Pride movie in a way. Not enough. I mean, it certainly could have been more, but you get such a good glimpse of what the lifestyle of the fighters and the era of Pride was like through that documentary that you certainly do not get in the 2025 film.
Because the only reason they made this movie is because The Rock kind of looks like Mark Kerr.
False. False, 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 false. They made this movie because of the documentary. So you can stare into the camera and say that all you want, Vampiric Legs, but that is incorrect.
The Rock wanted to do a real Oscar-worthy performance. He wanted that Adam Sandler treatment. He wanted to get, back in the win column after all of these weird things in the Moana series. That was a series and got turned into Moana 2. That's the thing about Moana 2. It's supposed to be a series, and they chopped it up, and they put it back together, and that's why it felt so disjointed. Disjointed. Same with... What was the other big Rock flop recently? Where he tried to go into DC and rearrange the power hierarchy of the DC universe and make everything about Black Adam. Black Adam's like a villain from like not a niche, like Shazam isn't necessarily niche, but Black Adam was supposed to just be the villain of Shazam 2, and then The Rock somehow finagled his way into like not only making it his own movie, but making him the center of the fucking universe over there, which is weird. And I'm not saying it killed the DCU, but it fucked it up big time, and then James Gunn has luckily resurrected it to a degree.
I don't care really much about The Rock's other stuff, but to his point about this being The Rock's Oscar bait film, that has certainly been a narrative that has been going around surrounding this. I've never, I would need like actual confirmation of that before I like think that that was a big part of why he wanted to portray this character, because I can see that as like, yes, this is The Rock portraying a serious role that he has not done before. It is a departure from his common style of film and all of that. But I don't necessarily think that like that was a driving force behind this. Again, I think that this more falls on Benny Safdie wanting to remake the documentary and The Rock being the right person for the job. So I don't agree with this criticism broadly, and the rest surrounding The Rock's other stuff is irrelevant. I wonder if a Pride film would be allowed. Possibly, they wouldn't want to stir up past Yakuza corruption they have been trying to distance from. Yeah, that is an interesting point with that. I mean, you can make the film regardless of that, and then let the chips fall as they may. It might be a little harder to make it, but there's certainly been films that go against that type of, that go into cultures that may not want to be exposed in that way. If that is the case, then I mean, it would certainly make it harder, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think that it makes for a very compelling story within that world and that time frame. So they're kind of inextricable from one another. I remember like it sounds to people who don't know about that element of it, it almost sounds comical, but not maybe not comical, but just like far fetched. But like, I remember talking to Chase about that when it comes to the Yakuza and Pride and the Yakuza's involvement in mixed martial arts in Japan. And that was the response, was like a kind of a skeptical laugh. And it's like, no, I mean, the Yakuza was a huge part of mixed martial arts. The Yakuza is still a huge part of the economy of Japan, which is kind of shocking to a lot of people. But the Yakuza still is operating in Japan and actually has like governmental designations because they would rather work with them than have to constantly be fighting against them. At least that was the case for a very long time. I don't know if maybe that has changed in the modern era. But anyway, the point is that I don't think that it would be a barrier to making that film, even if there would have been pushback from certain organizations and certain interests. I think that you can still present the Yakuza in the storyline in a way that would be satisfying, and I don't think that there would be so much of a barrier that it couldn't be done. And really, I mean, when you say that they want to distance themselves from the Yakuza, is that just Japanese MMA? Because if we're talking about Ryzen wanting to distance themselves from the Yakuza, I don't think that the opinion of Ryzen really matters when it comes to a narrative piece of fiction to that extent. I mean, they might come out and disavow it and say, hey, that was a long time ago and we are not involved in that in any way. And hopefully that is the truth. But either way, it's like, I don't think that you can stop the snowball from rolling once it is pushed down the hill. Having the American promotion's main rival be an organized crime-funded flashy presentation Japanese show is comic book-esque. Well, I mean, again, true to life, and if you did it in a way that was satisfying visually and from a narrative perspective, that could be very entertaining, Again, it sounds comic book-esque, but sometimes life is stranger than fiction, and there was a lot of Yakuza involvement in mixed martial arts. In fact, I mean, we're going to listen to MMA on Point here in a little bit. Go back to some of the MMA on Point's videos about Pride. They talk a lot about that era, and there are some really crazy stories from that time.
But man, The Rock he was looking for something, a big artsy performance, and he said, oh, Mark Kerr, that's artsy. Kind of tone deaf, in my opinion, to be like, oh, Mark Kerr, he was an addict. I can work with that. Because that's kind of what I think happened here. Is
Yeah, see, that's the thing, though. This is what's showing that Vampiric Legs does not know the documentary, because that assessment, I think, is very off base. Mark Kerr, that's artsy. No, that does not track in the slightest. So, this is definitely a perspective of someone who is not familiar with the source material.
like The Rock just looked around and he says, "Who looks like me?" And he said, "Oh, Mark Kerr kind of looks like you." And then he said, "Does he have any struggles that would make me look like a good actor, where I could be real dramatic and I could show my range?" And they said he had addiction issues and he had kind of a crazy wife. And The Rock said, "Yes, that'll do."
Yeah, see, I don't buy any of that. I don't buy any of that. I think I've made the reasoning pretty clear, but I think that is a false impression. However, again, for someone who does not know the documentary, perhaps a valid viewpoint without the proper context. And why would they? Why would they necessarily go out of their way? This is a mixed martial arts fan. This is a mixed martial arts content creator. This is someone in this world who did not feel compelled to look into the backstory far enough to know about the source material. So if that person is not doing that level of research, think about the average movie-going audience.
Like, that's the only reason I feel like they made this movie. And then The Rock kind of filled it with his friends. Not filled it with his friends, but like Emily Blunt, she was kind of big in like hooking up The Rock to Benny Safdie, because they were both, Emily Blunt and Safdie were both part of Oppenheimer, kind of. And Emily Blunt is like a great actress in this movie, but she also plays like a horrible character that never develops and is just played as an antagonist, you know? Like,
that goes back to the point that we were making earlier about the relationship tension between Mark and Dawn being so focused from the very beginnings, being such a big part and already established as a frictional relationship from the start of the movie. So I can definitely jive with that assessment of it. I think that better character development would have benefited their relationship. What I had said, if they had started it from the beginning and had it go up until that point of them in the gym, that would have been a nice amount of time to develop the positive elements of their relationship, and then have it break down farther into the film, which the documentary does very well. Almost, maybe a little. If I had any criticism of the documentary in that regard, it almost is a very hard left turn. But I think that in documentary storytelling, it works. So it being a bit of a sudden impact when it comes to Dawn left turning, it made sense for the documentary and did not translate very well to the film.
Like, she gets some moments where it's like, okay, I kind of care about her. Like, we'll do a brief synopsis in a bit here, but overall casting was okay. Like, Emily sure has enough range to get it done, but like, her character doesn't have any range. I feel like Emily Blunt's a better actress than what she was given here, and I think that speaks to the overall script, which we'll get to again in a bit here. Alexander Usyk is in this movie, and he's having a good-ass fucking time. He's in it for 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the absolute most, and he's just having an absolute fucking blast. Ryan Bader's here. He plays Mark Coleman, which at first I was a little bit weary about, and at the start of the movie I'm like, I don't know about this acting, and then I'm like, Ryan Bader's pretty good at this shit. Like, for a first-time actor, for this first movie ever, for Ryan Bader, he did a pretty bang-up job.
Okay, I mean, as far as Usyk goes, I think that he is spot on there. I mean, Usyk did a fine job. He didn't have a very ranged performance because he didn't need to. I thought that Coleman, on the other hand, or Ryan Bader playing Coleman, I mean, I guess, if the objective was to play a very even-toned, even-keeled character, then sure. I thought that the real-life Mark Coleman had more range in his portrayal of himself in the documentary than Ryan Bader gave him in this movie. Not much. I mean, Mark Coleman is kind of like just a down-tempo, everyman kind of man, so it is appropriate, but again, I think that from a narrative perspective, a heightening of the reality could have benefited that character could have benefited both of those characters, actually. I mean, really, almost across the board. That's something that dramatically could have improved a lot of elements of this film. Just a heightening of the core elements for each of the characters. I would definitely see that movie. Yeah, I certainly would watch the Pride movie, obviously. Emily Blunt is so. Oh Jesus. Okay, chill, Savage. Emily Blunt is a very attractive lady. Yes.
There were some scenes where he had to do like some wrestling training and stuff, and it's like, yeah, it looks legit, man, because Ryan Bader is legit. He's an NCAA, I believe, champion, or at least a high-level collegiate wrestler of some sort.
Yeah, but you don't really see it all that much. I mean, if he's talking about the one scene where he's wrestling with Court McGee, I believe Chase clued me in that was Court McGee. If he's talking about that, then yeah, but I mean, like, what does that have to do with this? Because this story has very little to do with the wrestling, with fighting in general. So, I mean, you see a very brief glimpse of Ryan Bader, and he is correct about that. Yeah, I mean, as a performative combat sports athlete in a portrayal sense, sure, he was fine. But it has such a minor impact on the character that I think it's almost irrelevant.
Bas Rutten steals the show, in my opinion. His performances are the best, even though he's older and he's playing a younger version of himself. But Bas Rutten doesn't age, so it works.
Yeah, see, I don't buy that, really. I mean, yeah, Bas was great because Bas is great, but his utilization in this film was just okay. I mean, it was, Chase kind of harped on the scene that Bas is in with the heart attack or whatever, medical incident he was having in the gym that was added. And I think that goes to show the embellishments were not correct. That's more of what it was. So when he says Bas steals the show, I'm like, if you like Bas and his personality, which is not hard to do because Bas is a great guy, an awesome dude. So yeah, he has an infectious personality that you want to enjoy, but at the same time, the utilization in this film, it did not add to the overall enjoyment of the story. It's like that was an embellishment, much like the scene where they're at the carnival, which I did think worked better. But again, these are the embellishment scenes that fill in the gaps from the original documentary that just did not do enough of the legwork to make the overall narrative satisfying.
He's the best part of this movie, for sure. Gary Copeland, that like jacked referee, I'll throw a fucking picture. Yeah, that guy, he's in the movie. He's the only ref I guess they could find, but whatever.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Gary Copeland being in the movie. That is an odd inclusion considering that he is so recognizable due to his size, but fine. Any connections in that regard are fine. I mean, it was very much clear that they wanted to show their stripes as far as making this the MMA movie, even though it didn't accomplish it with the story. I hope you're proud. I had to change my settings to see all messages to see that. True. I love Bas. If I ever watch the movie, it'll be because of him, but sad that it's mostly embellishment, but he cracks me up. Bas is a top G. Well, I definitely recommend watching the movie, and as a fellow person who loves Bas, yeah, you're going to get to see Bas Rutten, and you're going to get to see him being his normal, enjoyable self. Like, there is certainly nothing wrong with Bas's portrayal of himself. It's just a little weird that he's portraying himself while The Rock is portraying Mark Kerr. Another MMA fighter is portraying Mark Coleman, and Dawn is portrayed by a film actress. You know what I mean? Like it's an odd bunch, and you've got a boxer portraying a mixed martial artist as well. It's like it's just a jumble. It's like a little bit of a big make 'em up based on this tag team or ragtag team of characters. All thrown together for this movie. Even though it does work, it's just strange if you know all of the players involved. But again, still recommend.
He's there for like a scene in Pride. It captures a lot of the antics in Pride. They're like, oh, they're walking out. and oh, they're being kind of shady, giving them money and then not giving them money, and oh, they're not really testing people for steroids and they're kind of loosey goosey with the rules. And they do a good job of showing off some of that, but they don't go very deep into it. I feel like a dedicated Pride movie could have been the move here, and it would have been something that has more impact, in my opinion, than Mark Kerr.
So there you go. I mean, saying a lot of what you guys in the chat are saying. And yeah, I mean, I thought that the Pride presentation elements of this were pretty okay. I think that there probably could have been a little bit more heightening of the spectacle because it was such a spectacle in Pride. I think that Pride, one of the great things about Pride that we lost in the UFC takeover and the current era of the sport, aside from maybe places like One Championship, is the overall awe that you feel watching the show. I mean, MMA back in the Pride era was such like an over the top. It was an experience on top of watching the fighting. It was the pageantry of it. It was the pyrotechnics and the 10,000 people in the arena in Japan. It was a lot of elements that we have in very small degrees now. We have flecks of it. Again, One Championship, probably the closest thing to that now. But it's nowhere near the same, and this film could have probably emphasized that a little bit more. And as he is saying, and you guys have been saying, if it was a dedicated Pride movie, maybe we would have gotten more of that.
But unfortunately, that's never going to happen because the powers that be don't want to make a Pride movie, because you say Pride the movie, and people get some very different ideas about what that movie's going to be anyway.
Lol, but not true. I guarantee you that if I were to write the Pride movie, not saying that I necessarily would, but I think I might be a good candidate for it if I were so tasked. If I was going to do that, you call the movie Pride Never Die. And that gets the point across a lot better than Pride the movie. But I do take his point that you would have to market a Pride movie very, very specifically. And that, from the marketing side of my brain, would be front and center when Pride Never Die hits theaters.
The script was kind of all over the place, and I think it needs some tweaks, some adjustments.
See, another person saying the script was all over the place. I don't get this assessment. I have no idea where this is coming from, considering that A, the script is very close to the documentary, so very close to the reality of what happened, and B, it is very paint by numbers. Where is this all over the place assessment coming from? I really don't get it. Pride Parade of Fights. Yeah, see, on all of the marketing, you would have the Pride fist holding the lightning bolt, and it would just be black. So, no color whatsoever, specifically none showcasing the entire spectrum of chroma, a.k.a. the rainbow.
It's okay. You gotta give him something to work with. The big plot of the movie is that Mark Kerr is an addict, and then he gets better, but he doesn't know how to get better. Maybe that's not the main plot of the movie, but that works in tandem with Mark Kerr learning how to lose, if that makes any sense. Because he's undefeated, and then he goes to Japan and he has a wonky no contest that's originally lost, and then a no contest, and he's kind of pissy about it. And in the lead up to that fight, he said, if I ever lost, I don't know what I'd do with myself. So then he wins a fight, and then he loses a fight for realsies. And this is the end of the movie. The whole movie takes place over the course of 6 fights. 3 or 4 of which are in the intro, and then 2 are our main inflection points. 3 actually. Because there's the no contest, there's the one where he wins, and then there's the one where he loses. And these are the 3. Those take up 2/3 of the movie, and then there's another 3 minutes at the open where they devote to his first couple of fights or whatever. Anyway, so he has to learn how to lose, and then by the end of the movie, he's like, learned how to lose, and he's crying in the shower, but he's fine, because at least he learned that he could lose and not be totally distraught with himself. I don't know.
I thought that that was an interesting take on the like the core messaging of the movie, actually. So I mean, that was not necessarily what I took away, but I like it as like an analysis. I think that that's actually a very interesting analysis of like the messaging of the film, Mark learning how to lose. I don't necessarily agree that that was exactly what it was, but if that was his takeaway of it, I think that that is an interesting angle to take, assessing all of the progression that he just laid out. So I give him some credit for a unique perspective on it, as at least compared to my own. So I mean, not wrong, right, or otherwise necessarily. I mean, neither of us could be, whatever. I mean, we really are just taking factual information as far as what happened in this man's life and drawing what you want out of it. I, I, I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do think that if that was more of the aim, that might have been a more interesting film. Like if that was emphasized more, because really my perspective and what I said in the review was that it was, he got better, but then couldn't put the pieces together to become the greatness that he could have been if he didn't have all of the negativity in his life. So it was like he got better, but not better enough. That was my takeaway from everything. And that also kind of fell flat. So like either version of those assessments could be correct, but either one of them should have been chosen and emphasized more correctly, I think, is the big misstep here. But I like the assessment, though, so kudos to Vampiric Legs for having that perspective. Bro, I'd love to see you write a script for that. Oh, for the Pride movie? I know you'd actually pull facts and have the cinematics looking on point and make a good film. If you need a poor producer, I got you. Okay, appreciate it, brother. I mean, I've got so many like scripts that are like in various stages of development already that like I need to just commit to finishing. That's actually going to be on the docket at some point. I plan on taking like a little bit of a vacation from everything else and just trying to finish a couple of the scripts that I have in progress right now. But never say never. Pride never die, but never say never that Thinker doesn't try to take that on. And Pride's so crazy you don't need to embellish anything because the real Yakuza and the real shit is crazy enough. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That would be one. Again, if it was more like the Iron Claw, like you can do it where it has all of the trappings and the pieces of the story that are important for it to be true to life, but then embellishing isn't even the right word, just augmenting it in a way that makes it narratively satisfying. That's all you really need to do. It would be an interesting project to try to approach, though, because you've got a lot of fighters, you've got a lot of different narratives that all converge in Pride, and you have the promotion on top of it. So it's a lot of elements that would have to be like represented and streamlined for a narrative feature film's length. So I think that a Pride film would be a little bit of a challenging project to try to undertake, but like I said, never say never.
The dialogue's kind of weird in the movie, too, at points. The two lines that I really didn't like were, and I have them written down here, I only pulled my phone out in the movie theater like twice to write these down. At one point, Mark Kerr says the word intellectualize. I just don't think he would say that, quite frankly. He's
false. Absolutely false. I mean, if you've heard Mark Kerr speak, he certainly would use that kind of verbiage. Now, I don't necessarily remember him saying that specifically in the documentary, but if you hear him speak, he is extremely well-spoken, has a fine vocabulary, and that certainly would be in his lexicon. So, yeah, he is very off base with that.
He's sitting in the back talking with a Japanese reporter who has, he's speaking in kind of broken English. And he's like, intellectualize. I don't even know how I'd intellectualize to you, rather, the idea of me losing. And it's like, you would not say that.
He would.
Respectfully, I don't think you're saying intellectualize.
He would.
Mark is arguing with Dawn because she's a crazy bitch throughout the whole movie. Again, she's the antagonist of this movie. But yet, like, after the main part of the movie's over, he ends up marrying her and having a kid because that's how it went in real life. But we portray her really bad, and, like, their relationship is, like, always on the rocks. But then they ended up staying together for another, like, 10 years after the course of this movie. Weird.
But true. I mean, weird for all of us. That was Chase's big takeaway after the documentary review was it's like, yeah, we got this little piece of Mark Kerr's life, but then they did end up staying together. So strange. Like we didn't, it felt like an incomplete story, but it was an incomplete story. So you get what you get. The film portrayed that as it was. So I can't really fault that aspect of it. I think that maybe Dawn being portrayed a little differently in this film could have helped people understand that ending a little bit better, or that timeline after the film's events a little bit better. I haven't seen the doc or the movie, but I'm still finding this interesting and will watch both. Thank you very much, Andy. Appreciate you always, bro. Thank you. I'm glad that I'm making the case here because, God, somebody needs to, apparently, if no one saw this movie. Or, and now people who are younger have not seen the documentary. So do both. Highly recommend. Definitely the documentary at the very least. If you don't watch the film version of it, it wouldn't be as big a detriment as to watching the documentary. Because the documentary, I think, is such an impressive work of art. In addition to being a mixed martial arts cornerstone as far as media is concerned.
Anyway, they're having an argument, and Mark Kerr says, whatever's going on in that fucked up head of yours is an inside job. And I just fucking lost my shit. Because that's a phenomenal line. It's a phenomenal line. But... and then she tries to kill herself.
So, just to address the line first, that I will give him a little bit more credit on that. That is definitely the writer coming through. That is Benny Safdie doing some screenplay dialogue, which look, certain movies lend themselves to screenplay dialogue. Quentin Tarantino is notorious. His entire films are all screenplay dialogue. It is very hyper stylized movie dialogue for hyper stylized movies. So that makes sense. When a very grounded film has screenplay snappy dialogue, this is another criticism that came through in the Bruised review. When a movie that is trying to be very grounded has snappy dialogue that seems very crafted from a screenwriter, that is the result of it, is where you get a reaction like that. So that is a bar, though. That is definitely a bar.
She tries to shoot herself, and then she tries to eat a bunch of pills. And I'm going, what the fuck? What the fuck? And this was like, I think a week before he went and fought, and then he lost, and we're supposed to say, like, that's why he lost this fight, even though... I don't know. I guess that's a valid reason to lose a fight, but man, it was just weird.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of a weird way to present the criticism. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, yeah, that is what happened in the movie. That is what happened in real life. I think that your reaction to it is a little bit stranger than the reality. Because, yeah, that is certainly a valid reason to lose a fight, perhaps. Not necessarily the incident itself, but all of the turmoil in your life being, being represented and localized to that, I think makes sense. So I when I was watching this review, I was like, that's like, what are you trying to say there? Because it's like, yeah, that is weird. And a very traumatic thing for a person to have to go through in reality, which happened to Mark Kerr, basically. So what are you trying to get across, I guess? But I don't know.
And then we get to the last couple of minutes of the movie, and it's like Mark Kerr in a grocery store, and it's present day, and it's actually Mark Kerr pushing around a grocery cart, and it's like, what are we saying here? And they keep flashing things up on screen, like, Mark Kerr went on to have a career after this, and then he retired. And then he married his longtime girlfriend in I don't know what year it was, and then they ended up like getting divorced in 2015, but they didn't say that. They didn't say that they got divorced on the thing. So, got
They did. I think that they said that they were together for 6 years, which is, I think, what was true to reality. Um, yeah, I mean, the end of the film is very similar to the end of the documentary as far as the text goes. Obviously, not the fourth wall breaking and all of that is a lot different, but the points that they hit from the text are somewhat similar at the very least, and that was one of them. So, yeah, I mean, if his broader point is that the film ends in a weird way, correct.
him there, and they're like, he continues to be a pioneer in the sport, and he doesn't get the recognition he deserves. Fighters today fight for millions, but this guy, he needed more than what he got. He needs more than what he got, man. And that's the fucking movie. That's how it ends.
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, he's correct. It wasn't necessarily saying that Mark deserved more. It was saying that the fighters from this era were not as well represented compared to the representation of the fighters today. And this is an example of that. This is a person who fought then, and this is what his story was. And while you know all of the names of the sport today, this is a story that you probably did not know. And this is an era of the sport that you probably did not know. He's talking to this guy specifically, this younger man here, this person who probably has very little knowledge of the Pride era aside from clips on YouTube. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is the person that information was directed at, and as you can see, it is falling flat on him. So this is not necessarily even a criticism of Vampiric Legs. This is more a criticism of the film, saying that if your point was to try to resonate with an audience that was outside of the frame of reference of the documentary, then obviously with a person like Vampiric Legs, you did not succeed.
It ends with telling you a little lecture about how you need to respect the pioneers of MMA more, sure, and that's it. It's kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, I mean, that's a definite criticism that I think is valid in the sense of the narrative presentation, because it was an anticlimactic story in a general sense. I mean, I think that the documentary portrayed a number of elements that made its conclusion more satisfying and fulfilling. But if you just take the point-by-point breakdown of the film and the documentary to an extent, then yeah, it's a very simple story. So it has a very simple conclusion. And as you can see, it was not something that resonated with this commentator.
All the drugs. And at one point, Emily Blunt's character throws a bowl across the room. It was a bowl that he bought in Japan, and then she glues it back together with regular glue, but it was supposed to be gold glue. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, wow, man, is that an allegory for something? Putting this relationship back together, but it's not correct. And then they never talk about it. And then that's like when he's leaving Boss Rutten, because he trains with Boss Rutten for a bit to get back into shape after his no contest and his overdose that he plays off really well. He says, I don't know, man. I was on the ground. I just had a bad cold, man. And it's like, dude, dude, we can tell what's going on here. But everybody else fell for it. Mark Coleman said, oh, yeah, we're here, man. Must have been a real bad cold. Knocked you on your ass.
I mean, just to touch on the bowl thing for a moment. Yeah, that was what that was. And I mean, if you're recognizing it as that and saying that it wasn't satisfying, then okay, another element of the film that did not work for you. But I thought that was okay. I didn't think that the bowl as a representation of the relationship was a bad analogy. You know, I understood what they were doing with that from pretty much the second that he bought that bowl in the film. So I thought that it worked in a broad sense. Again, I mean, you know, if you're talking about this from a top-down perspective and a bird's eye view of this film, I thought that was a fine way to represent what they were trying to represent with it. But again, Vampiric Legs not necessarily taking any deeper substantive meaning from that. So also perhaps a failing of the film.
All right, buddy. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking that this is a 7 out of 10, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 movie. It could have been far better than it was, in my opinion. And it's just a Rock thing, you know? It's just a Rock thing where he's trying to be different and he's trying to get that Oscar. It's Oscar bait. It's let's get like a guy who almost won an Oscar directing and editing and writing and producing and all that shit. And then we'll get an actor who has more range than he gives off. And we'll put him in a role that's kind of sad and has a happy ending to a degree. And a movie that's shot well and kind of artsy. Well-respected studio. And we're going to try and win ourselves an award.
Yeah, we talked about that already. I'd need to see more solid proof that that was the intention there. I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. I don't know how much more he really goes into in this. I guess we can let it run. Why not? It's only 5 more minutes.
And they just didn't do it well. Unfortunately, they just didn't put it together in the way that I would have liked them to. Because I think there's a good story here. And especially going from Iron Claw to this. Iron Claw, they deal with like some addiction issues and how it ends up messing up someone's life. And I think it's done way better over there in like less time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that the Iron Claw is a bigger scope of film. You've got multiple characters and the interconnection of all of those people converging in the wrestling world, but then also having lives outside of it and their own struggles and conflicts that they bring to a family dynamic, which this film does not have. This film has Mark, this film has Dawn, this film has Coleman, and that's about it as far as the core drivers of the narrative. The rest of it is all the interaction with the sport, but it's very small. The Iron Claw is much more broad, and because of that, you have a number of elements that add more interest from a narrative perspective.
Here it's devoted to like the whole movie is about like him being an addict and then him being a recovering addict and Dawn being a bitch to him when he's a recovering addict and popping Tylenol in front of him and shaking the bottle right in his ear. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fair. She's being a bitch and not helping you stay sober, but you got your sponsor. I think his name was Jim. Shout out Jim, the sponsor. I like that guy. I wish he got screen time. He was just over the phone a couple times. I feel like it could have just been a mini series. I feel like you could have told this over like 6 to 8 hours and you could have fleshed things out a little bit more and shown this slow progression of him becoming more and more addicted. Because in the movie, it's kind of everything's ham-fisted. They fit 4 years worth of person into, how long was the movie? I want to say it was 151. Give me a moment. I've now checked. It was 2 hours, 3 minutes. And they couldn't fit everything they wanted into this movie. And the last 3 minutes was just like Mark Kerr walking around a grocery store. Like, I feel like there's so much more in depth they could have went through. Unless there's no actual other big moments other than like Dawn trying to kill herself. Mark almost killing himself with drugs. Like, there was so much that they could have went into, and they could have told like a real dynamic story about perseverance.
Yeah, I think that tracks. I mean, if they wanted to do it that way, that certainly could have been a possibility. They probably could have gotten more dramatic elements fleshed out better if they had done it that way as a miniseries. But I don't think it necessarily needed to be that. I think that within a 2-hour runtime, they could have accomplished a lot more than what they did. It was just the adherence to the documentary.
Coming to terms with his mortality and coming to terms with the idea that he's not always going to be here and not always going to win, which is the idea that they kind of play with. And I think that's supposed to be the core of the movie. And that's what he's doing in the end when he's sitting in the shower, just sitting there like kind of half crying with 2 beams of water falling on him, where he's like, oh my God, the weight's finally off my shoulders.
But he wasn't, though. He was laughing in the shower. I don't know why this dude thinks that he was crying in the shower. He never was. He was like laughing to himself and just sort of like, damn, isn't life crazy? So I don't know where that assessment is coming from. All right, well, you know what? I'll end the vampiric section here because I think that that's pretty much all that we needed to hear from him. So shout out to Vampiric Legs. Go go and subscribe to his channel if you're not already. He is a quality content creator, even if some of his points were a little off base here. But I think it was a good exercise in getting more of a perspective from an MMA fan who probably a little bit newer to the sport and probably not as well versed in all of the details of Mark Kerr and the documentary. So that's that. The last thing that I have here is from MMA On Point, and this is, I believe, Jason Hart from MMA On Point. This is his like flash review of the film. I think he says he's on vacation when he's doing this, so he kind of got this out, and this is just sort of his like free-form thoughts. But this is from the MMA hardcore community element here. So this is the people who know the sport like the back of their hand. They know the history of the sport. They're very familiar with Pride and the current landscape as well. So they know the documentary very, very well as well. So this is about as informed an opinion as you're going to get about the Smashing Machine aside from the Yama channel.
Picture this. A camera slowly fades from black as a stunned, invisibly injured wrestler clenches his knee. While the camera slowly pulls out, you see this man isn't merely in training or even in a mixed martial arts fight. No, he's at a large wrestling competition. The figure then slowly gets back to his feet, tosses his wrestling shoes in a trash bin nearby, and says he's done, despite having several more wrestling matches left that day. A close friend then whispers into that defeated man's ear.
So I throw my shoes away. What's the point? And Art Motori, kids, he comes over and says, listen, it'll be the last time your mom's gonna watch you wrestle. Why don't you get your shoes on?
He's at a crossroads in his life. His stellar amateur career is coming to an end, and his mother is terminally ill with cancer. He goes on to compete with his mother on his mind as news flashes on screen about the murder of his friend Dave Schultz, who he trained with at the crazed hands of John DuPont by gunpoint. Kerr tries his absolute best as one of the legitimate best amateur wrestlers on the planet to overcome his mental state. But these circumstances are just far too much for any one person to handle. The film then cuts to several months later in July of 1996, while an inconsolable Kerr is at home savoring the last few months of his mother's life, while the two of them watch Kerr's close wrestling friends on TV. The man to ironically beat him at the beginning of all of this, Mark Coleman, winning UFC 10, and then on another channel is Kurt Angle, winning a gold medal at the 1996 Atlanta Games. Then skip a couple months ahead, and now a fully broken man is seen at his mother's funeral openly weeping and vowing to be the best version of himself. Perhaps now he can be the man he wanted to be before watching his mother pass. He feels he failed at the beginning of the year 1996 with his wrestling career, seeing his friends have all their success, and now vows to make something more of himself. Something that is certainly impossible.
You know, after my mom died, I was just devastated. And so I had this attitude where it's like, you know what, I'm just going to put my foot down on the gas, right? And I'm going to go forward as hard as I can. You know, if I won 5 championships, I should have won 10, right? So I'm in this perpetual wheel of never enough.
Yeah.
So guys, these are the real life circumstances and motivations behind Mark Kerr's reason to fight and put himself through the entirety of this film.
So I wanted to let that play uninterrupted because that perspective of like making this story, I think is something that certainly could have been more compelling. I think that's pretty obvious the way that it's described by Jason there. But also, I think that it is really indicative of why this film failed. Because what Jason is doing here is outlining a lot of elements that are not in the documentary. He's outlining a lot of backstory that is very compelling. All of what he said there is very draws the viewer in and connects you to Mark even more so than the documentary does. It accomplishes elements outside of what the documentary accomplishes that complement the story as a whole. And that is the failing of the 2025 film. It does not flesh out those story elements to the point of satisfaction in any way. None of these elements that are described in this introduction are represented at all in the 2025 film. Not that they even need to be, but if you had brought certain parts of it into the story in different places, as opposed to what they did bring in to flesh out the rest of this story, it might have been more compelling. It might have been a more satisfying product. Even if you took a tenth of what he just talked about there. I mean, I didn't know about the story that started it out with him, wanting to throw away his wrestling shoes and his mother being terminally ill. I didn't know that she passed away, but I didn't know the whole element of the story as far as, her being prolonged in illness and, it being an ongoing thing that, she affected him as deeply as it did within the nature of the sport, being able to perform in front of her. All of those things that he just laid out could have been in places partially elevating of what the movie ultimately became. Why did they do the movie like this? Might be the best question about this movie. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a pretty broad question, but it speaks to the overall the thesis of what we're trying to assess here today. So yeah, it's all in line. It all works within the same ecosystem. Man, I wish that was the first half of the movie and the actual first half of the movie was the end. Yeah, I mean, that could have certainly been another way to do it. Again, the adherence to the documentary is almost the downfall of the film in a big way. I mean, it was very interesting to see the documentary so faithfully reproduced in part, but then in other parts, it felt like it was 98% a reproduction and the 2% put it into the uncanny valley. So that didn't work. And then all of the elements that are not in the documentary are as I've been describing. So yeah, that certainly could have been the way of it. And how great would that have been if you had that all as the lead up to the beginning of the movie, and then the movie serves as almost a prequel to the documentary. So you end up getting the documentary as the companion piece, and you can watch them both together as like a two-parter and get some crazy level of satisfaction out of both of those as like one from the era, one modern day representation coming together as two halves of the same whole. I think that would have been pretty amazing. Hey, what's up, Didgeridoo Dave? Yes, the rare Sunday stream, but there is a purpose behind it, so let's continue. Appreciate you, brother.
It sets up the irony that while Kerr and Coleman are friends, they are literally opponents in both sports for a time, or at least it appears to be that way in MMA as well. And so the movie then follows his unquenchable desire and futile attempts at self-medication for a man trying to literally submit his own grief. So yeah, guys, sorry for the long intro here, but I think it's a real big metaphor for the rest of the film and some missed opportunities that could have been done. By the way, those clips, Chris Van Fleet, amazing interview that he did with Mark Kerr. Some others have put spotlights on this stuff, but I thought it was particularly good, and I do recommend watching the whole thing. Oh, and by the way, I'm in Vegas right now, hence the background and Airbnb. Supposed to be on vacation, but here I am. But anyhow, the point of all this is these are the things that the movie fails to do. Instead of starting with the incredible circumstances and motivations that shaped the debut of Mark Kerr, the whole reason why he does any of this anyway, they just simply jump to the World Vale Tudo Championships much like the documentary does. It's almost exactly the same.
I mean, that's the biggest point in general, right? We've been saying it over and over again. The adherence to the documentary is the detriment and downfall of the film. So, yeah, I definitely understand the perspective here. Yeah, appreciate you guys.
And so that's probably my biggest gripe about this film. What I feel like this movie does in some ways is traces over the original Smashing Machine documentary, just like you might do in a coloring book. It then makes a few small changes, some of them odd changes. So then everyone involved pats themselves on the back for the Oscar-worthy original film they just now put together, or in reality, their very own Rembrandt that was just traced over to continue the art metaphor.
I mean, why I wanted to save this one for the end was that right there. Tracing over the original documentary, I don't think could have summarized it any better. That really is, I think, cuts to the core from the perspective of the people who know the documentary. I think that is down the line the best way to describe it. So, again, taking it from the 3 levels kind of thing that we've been doing here, where you have a person who is, I guess it was supposed to be someone outside of the MMA world, turned out to be a little bit more knowledgeable than that. But, someone who is a casual, someone who is a fan and involved, but not as knowledgeable about the history, and then the top-down person who knows the history, the culture, currently and past. It doesn't work for any of those groups, sadly. I mean, it works in pieces, it works in parts, but as a whole, as the sum of the parts, it doesn't add up, unfortunately.
So let me be really clear here. I'm being very harsh about these elements because it is something that feels like it could be so close to being actually great, like incredible, amazing, 10 out of 10 stuff. But because it makes these choices to color along the same lines, it feels like it's just, I don't know, it's just reusing old things where it could be something truly great. So I am being harsh on it because of those reasons, but also I think it's actually a pretty decent film and I do think it's worth watching.
Very much what myself and Chase said. I think that there's a lot of overlap between our assessments here. In fact, if you go down to the comments of this video, I think you'll see one from the Yama channel, agreeing with a lot of his points here. Because, yeah, it is a well-made film. It is a worthwhile watching experience, I would say. It's just very, very much small in comparison to what it could be, and missed opportunities are a running theme throughout.
And that's why I did this really long hypothetical intro. It's an example of something that they could have done rather than just doing what the documentary did. Actually telling stuff that wasn't caught by the documentary crew on camera, the stuff that went behind it, the motivations, who Mark Kerr really was and why he goes through all these crazy things he does throughout the film. Why does he do it? You don't really know that by the end of the film. So how could I still think of this as a decent film at the end of the day despite all that? Well, there's a lot this film frankly does get right. There's so many lovingly recreated moments, like the UFC sets, the Pride sets, the daises, like all these different places that they go to, even some of the promotional materials. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the attention to detail is certainly not missed in anything in this film. I mean, we talked in our review about the scene where Mark Kerr is in the car and he's talking to the doctor's office, and he's basically like ordering drugs like he's ordering a pizza, is how I had said it. It's almost one-to-one. The uncanniness of it is just incredible. And then all of those surrounding elements, in addition to the actual presentation of the information, it's also the presentation of the visuals. You're seeing it some on screen here now. The way that the filters on the camera are, it draws you back into this era in a very real way. So there's a lot of visual value. I mean, I think that that's one of the bigger praises I can give to this film and to Benny Safdie as a director, is that he is a director with definitive visual vision, for lack of a better term. He's got a vision, and he portrays information in a visually satisfying way. So when the story itself is lacking, it's unfortunate because you're seeing all of this really nice, very era-appropriate visual stylization that is almost not being utilized to its full potential because the story doesn't add up to meet it halfway.
I really absolutely adore these aspects of the film. And on the positives, again, I think Emily Blunt and The Rock's depiction of Dawn and Mark is outstanding, and definitely worth watching alone for some of those moments that either happened off camera or didn't make it into the documentary's final cut. It feels like there's enough meat on the bone here to make this film worth watching, in my opinion, and their relationship is a chief example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that completely. I think that Emily Blunt is such a good Dawn that it's eerie at times. I mean, like she really embodies the human that Dawn was very uncannily. I mean, I keep using that word over and over again, sometimes in a positive and sometimes in a negative way. In this case, very positively. I mean, she was Dawn. Like, that was who Dawn was. She had her mannerisms and her vocal inflections down, the points by point nature of thing, like it all added up. She looked the part, she played the part, she spoke the lines correctly. Like, Emily Blunt was a standout performer amongst the cast of characters here. Again, if the material had elevated that, it would have been that much more effective.
There's some really well done scenes between the two in this film. They're kind of the heartbeat of this film. And some of the moments in this film, I thought they couldn't possibly recreate what happened in real life, but somehow they actually did, and some of them actually moved me at points. This film is obviously a roller coaster of a tale if there ever was one, and yeah, these moments are integral to making this film worth your time to watch. So I do think they nailed that for a fair bit of it. And hot take, I actually really like the way they use a lot of athletes. Like, Ryan Bader is not an actor, but for some reason, it just kind of works.
Everybody's saying this. I mean, again, I guess it's just because of the nature of Mark Coleman, you know, being sort of, a kind of average dude who is extraordinary in fighting, but very even keeled otherwise. But like, I didn't get the impression that Ryan Bader had some kind of amazing range. I would need to see him actually act. I would need to see him actually emote in order to give a better assessment of his ability as an actor. He did fine in this role, but this was not exactly a taxing role. This was a very, buddy, this is like your standard, I'm your buddy, I'm there for you guy. So everybody giving all of this praise to Ryan Bader for his acting, I'm not saying it was bad. I certainly thought it was serviceable for the part. It's just, it's a little bit of a heap of praise on something that I don't necessarily consider like all that praiseworthy, but it was what the part called for, so it was appropriate. It was certainly appropriate, but I'd like to see, like, if Ryan Bader goes on to act more, I would like to see like some actual digging deep from him to get a full-on assessment of whether or not he's actually a good actor. He was fine in this film.
Like, is Mark Coleman the most expressive person you've met in your life? So if Ryan Bader comes off a bit stilted in his acting, well, Coleman is a bit stilted in his real life behavior. Like,
right, but that's why he's making my point for me there. I'm basically rehashing it, but still, that's why it's like, yeah, he was fine for this role, but the character was not very dynamic.
He's just not that expressive or animated of a person. So yeah, it kind of matches up. Usyk is brilliant as Igor Vovchanchyn. He doesn't have as many lines, but he's outstanding. And there are plenty of other athletes. And that's another one of the things I really like about this film. They used a lot of real people. I wasn't too big on their choice for Paul Varelans, which is the beginning of the film, so that's not a big, spoiler or anything. But they had some weird choices in there, but for the most part, really, really good casting all throughout. Real refs, real fighters, the real announcers, Stephen Quadros. Even at the beginning where they didn't have the original guys, they used guys like Kenny Rice. It's really cool stuff, like legitimately amazing.
And that goes back to this being a love letter to the documentary and to this era of the sport and essentially the sport itself. So I think that all of that tracks pretty well. I made my points about the casting and how, like, it was kind of a little bit disjointed in my opinion, just because of the jumble of everybody and then the prosthetics with The Rock, all that. We talked about all of that stuff. So valid opinion, I would say, in the big picture, but I had some more, nuanced criticism of it, I guess you could say, but certainly fine that he believes all this stuff.
Oh yeah, and holy shit, is Bas Rutten good as Bas Rutten? Of course he's good as himself, but just as an actor, that doesn't mean he's a great actor. Well, we already knew he was a fairly decent actor coming into this. He actually had some really intense scenes. Like, there's one training scene I don't want to spoil and give everything away for, but he does such a good job of being believable in a scene that just I don't know. It just seemed like it would have been really hard to do, probably because he really went through it and he's actually a decent actor. So yeah, he actually really stood out to me in this one.
Yeah, I mean, Boss is a likable guy, and he is a fine enough actor to make it work in this film. It was just the utilization and that specific scene that he's talking about. We already talked about it, but just a little bit odd in the grander narrative. But yeah, Boss is great. Everybody loves Boss. Like, Boss is one of those guys, you know, when they do those memes of like, give me an MMA opinion that everyone agrees with. Boss Rutan being cool and a guy that everybody likes is probably I'd say a universally agreed upon sentiment in this sport.
Even though he's like, 30 years older than he was back then. On the other end of things, I do think The Rock does a really good job here. He actually pulls off some of the more intense scenes. Not necessarily every one of them, but overall, I think he does pull off this role. I just don't really know how much we needed the fake eyebrows, the fake nose. Obviously, it made sense to cover up the tattoos, so some of the prosthetics made sense. But I don't know, at some points, it's actually kind of distracting for me because he doesn't look like Mark Kerr, nor does he look like The Rock there. So I guess it's better to not just be thinking he's The Rock the whole time, even though I kind of did.
Kind of making the same point that Vampiric Legs made, and I do to an extent agree with. It wasn't like something that took me out of the film, but hearing it from a number of different sources, I kind of see the perspective on that. You're a boss supremacist? Same, brother. How could you not be? You know what I mean? It's like, this is Boss World Order. Kind of unfortunate that Boss never had more of an active role in the UFC because, like, I think he would have made for an interesting character in the earlier days of the promotion. But, history is what it is.
I see what they were going for. I just don't know if they needed all that, is my point. And yeah, for a film that is oddly choreographing his, life for those 3 years, not to mention with moments that were already caught on camera as they actually happened, there is a surprising amount of authenticity by finding all those real people and recreating it so well and so faithfully to how it actually looked back in the day. So it's a strange mix of that, I don't know, Hollywood feel with, I don't know, just the love and care of, what A24 is frankly known for. So, I mean, they do pull off a lot here. But the most important part of the film, no matter what, is the attention it brings back to Mark Kerr and what actually happened in his real life and the recognition he deserves. This is a channel that has been founded basically on retelling the past. I'm really, really happy the levels and the lengths that they went to put Mark Kerr's story out there. And I think that's basically the most important thing here.
Well, see, that's the most important thing for people like MMA On Point and people who care that deeply about this sport and the history of this sport. In fact, to go back to referencing the comment that I left on this video, I don't know if it'll show up if I scroll down. Yeah, here. I guess it just shows up at the beginning. But yeah, I say here, we shared a lot of the same sentiments. It just took us 2 hours to say it. Thanks for all you guys do for MMA historical preservation. And that's really, I think, the broader point in relation to what he said there. It's like, yes, those things for fans that care that deeply, it's interesting and definitely valuable. But if we're going back to the thesis of this stream here today, I think it's to the detriment of the film itself because there are only a very select group of people. That's a hyper focusing on a small demographic, people that care this deeply about the sport and about the history of the sport, know the documentary, know Mark Kerr, know the story of Pride to an extent. Like, they're not going to be a broad enough audience to carry over into a massive success. So the narrative had to do the legwork, and that's where the failure lies, I believe. So if there was anything I was trying to lead to with all of these reactions to these reviews, that's basically the point, is that the point he makes here is a great one, that this film, as a love letter to the sport, to Mark Kerr's life, and to the source material in the documentary, is all very serviceable and all very welcomed by people like them and like myself and Chase to an extent. We appreciate this and there is value there. but the narrative itself had to be stronger if this was going to be a success, because we are such a small population and the movie-going audience needed to be the first people being served by this film in order for it to succeed. And that's where the narrative comes into play. That's where the dramatic elements come into play, the beats, all of those things that make a great film in and of itself, aside from the history, those needed to be stronger, and that was ultimately the failure.
Alongside obviously making money and making an entertaining movie. But it's not just that, there's John Greenhouse, the guy who put this film together on $10,000 of a budget and got everybody else involved, like John Hyams, who ended up being the director, and all the, fundraising that they had to do. It's pretty incredible to see these guys get a bit of shine off the back of this. And for those that say they already got shine off this, well, the movie came out in 2002 when MMA was in the darkest of the dark ages. Nobody was giving any kind of time to fighters back then. Even when the film came out in the early 2000s, that was still before the sport was popular. So I hope that this film brings attention back to the original. I still recommend the original more than this, but hopefully it means that you get to see that now and you know something about Mark Kerr.
And that, sadly, is the end product of this film failing. And that, I think, is really the saddest part of all of this, is that being that the film did not succeed, it also did not succeed in that endeavor. It did not succeed in bringing attention to this underrepresented time period of the sport. I mean, think about it in comparison to where we are now. We are on the verge of having UFC fights at the White House. We have seen UFC fights at the Sphere in a spectacle unlike anything that the sport has ever seen, even including Pride. We've been seeing MMA reach heights and locations and people from all over the world in a way that we never have before, but this is the genesis of it. And this film's failure, unfortunately, it does not give the shine that it was intending to that era, and that is really the saddest point of them all for me, because this film had an opportunity to showcase an era that is going to be ultimately forgotten to the sands of time in a real way. MMA On Point has a great video on their channel about the historical preservation of mixed martial arts and how little there is in the earliest phases of it. I mean, when MMA was first getting started in the late 60s, early 70s with Vale Tudo and the earliest incarnations of mixed disciplines competitions, film cameras, as far as consumer grade cameras went, were still rare. I mean, I think that the first video camera came out somewhere in that era, and I mean, talking about video cameras rather. I mean, like VHS tape era, film like Super 8 and things like that, like actual like film cameras were around and could have been documenting some of this, but a lot of it is just going to naturally be lost because it was not preserved. So this era is kind of the earliest where preservation even was at a level that it could be preserved for future generations, as opposed to just being circulated within the time period that it existed in. So the fact that this film did not resonate with audiences was sadly a missed opportunity for the film itself, but also for shining a grander spotlight on an underrepresented era of the sport, which continues to erode over time. And as new fans get into this sport, they're not necessarily going to be able to go back to it as readily. Like, Pride will still be archived. Luckily, a lot of it is on YouTube. There were DVDs of it coming out by the 2000s. Obviously, there was enough technology for it to be readily preserved. But earlier in the sport, it's just going to continue to be shaved away, except for maybe the most hardcore of MMA historians. And a film like this had the opportunity to create more of those historians. Give people who are younger an interest in the history of this sport, and its failure, I think, is ultimately a sad point for the potential that could have had.
Oh, and if you are wondering about the documentary, they will be re-releasing this soon, so keep an eye out for that. Actually, John Greenhalgh and I have gotten in contact with each other. He saw the video that I had made before that was a couple months back about this film and why The Rock was making a movie about it. So I definitely recommend checking out his channel. I'll have him linked in the description because he's going to be releasing all kinds of cool stuff, like behind the scenes footage that didn't make the cut in the film, stuff that was maybe too different from the actual focus of the documentary. Really cool stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome. By the way, I'm glad that that Jason talked about that here, and that's obviously stuff that I'll be checking out at some point. Very cool that they're re-releasing the documentary. I think that that's very important, specifically because this film did not succeed. So if you have not had the opportunity to watch the original documentary, when it gets re-released, definitely take that opportunity when you can, because it is a very high quality piece of art, in my opinion. You know, me and Chase had certain differing opinions about the narrative elements of it within like the documentary framework, but I think that if you go into it looking at it both through an MMA perspective and through an artistic perspective, there is an immense amount of value in it. If you did not watch our review, I give the original documentary a 9 out of 10 personally.
You'll be seeing that soon on his channel, and of course the re-release, which he'll use all that stuff to promote the re-release. And so I guess it comes back to, what did I actually think in terms of putting a number on it? I think I've seen most people doing between 7, 7.5, or 8. If I'm feeling really optimistic, maybe I'll give it an 8, but probably the most comfortable is 7.5 for me as well. I think a lot of people have had decent reviews of the film, some harsher, some more positive. I've definitely seen more positive, but 7.5 feels way more like where it actually sits to me.
And I gave it a 7 personally, so that's in line. I mean, I think that anything between 6.5 to 8 is appropriate for this film. I think 7 is where I landed, and 7 is what I feel most appropriate.
But this is just a first impression video, so you'll see a whole lot more coverage. We'll do some comparisons between the film and actual reality, get into the nitty gritty of it. I might even do some collabs with John Greenhalgh, just because, I don't know, what that guy's done and is doing is badass. He also did the Foxcatcher documentary, which I can't recommend enough, which is on Netflix. So
yeah, also highly recommend the Foxcatcher documentary. That is a really, really quality piece of work as well. But that's pretty much it. I mean, they're going to go into all of the spiel about MMA on Point, and if you are not subscribed to MMA on Point, that's required viewing as far as I'm concerned. MMA on Point, one of the best mixed martial arts channels on YouTube. So make sure that you're subscribed to them, and to John Greenhalgh's channel as well, TSM Doc Official. I'll be going to check some of those pieces of information out as well. And, I'll keep an eye out for what they put out about this film and all of that kind of stuff in the future. But ultimately, I think that accomplishes what the task of today's stream was, to try to get to the bottom of why this film failed. And really, I think it ultimately comes down to the narrative. I think it comes down to the narrative portrayal in a fictionalized representation of real life. It stayed too within the lines of the original documentary. As Jason said, it is very much a tracing of the documentary, and not enough of a dramatization to be satisfying. And I think that ultimately, paired with the marketing elements that we described earlier, and a couple of other things involving, all of what we already went over, basically goes into what ultimately led to the downfall of the 2025 film. So that's pretty much what I have for you on the reasons behind The Smashing Machine was not a success. Thank you very much for taking this journey with me. I appreciate you guys, and I will end out with y'all in the chat here. So what's going on with y'all? Hydra, go to bed. You have school tomorrow? I got school tomorrow, too. It is a school night for me as well. I got to go review that ridiculous event that we had on Saturday. I don't know how many of you were watching the bungling in Canada, the the Canadian screw job that went over on the UFC on Saturday, but good Lord, was that a mess and a half. Thank you to all you guys who were in the chat for that. What a ridiculous display we went through on Saturday. Tommy Toehold is the best on MMA on point. Yeah, Tommy Toehold is good. Yeah, I like him. I used to like the other English guy that they used to have for a while there. I forget what his name is, but the dude with the thinner nose. They have another English guy on there now. Who what's his Balian? I'm not the biggest Balian fan. Like, he's okay, but I think that he's more of an interesting voice as opposed to like someone that really resonates with me. But on the whole, you know, cumulatively, MMA on Point is one of the best mixed martial arts channels on the internet. So definitely will catch the doc. Absolutely do that, dude. Glad to see you did a Sunday stream. I wasn't active, but lurking. Believe me, bro, I appreciate you always, dude. You can lurk as much as you want. You can be as active as you want. I know that this was a little bit more of like dense material that I wasn't really as interactive with the chat on yet again. So thank you guys for hanging out and bearing with me through all of that. I appreciate you either way. I appreciate you either way, always. So thank you very much for being here. This week is an early card. Yes. What time does this one start coming up? Is this another Middle East guy? Oh no, this is England, right? No, wait, is it? This is the Tom Aspinall card. Where's that taking place? Is that in England? Does my goddamn phone want to actually tell me? I'm fucking Jesus. It starts at 10 a.m. Okay, geez. Yeah, that is early. Where is... Oh, it's in Abu Dhabi. Okay, gotcha. 10 a.m. Thank you very much for the reminder on that. Yes, for myself and for everybody else hanging out for this stream, the upcoming event takes place at 10 a.m. this Saturday. So we will all have to get up nice and early in the morning to be ready for that. Have to talk to the Vitz King about that one with his crazy schedule. I got washed yesterday or day before yesterday. Yeah. Same here, brother. Same here. Dude, I took such a fucking bath on that card. Good Lord. That was a nightmare. What happened in Canada, aside from all of the terrible refereeing and all kinds of shenanigans, just losing all of my money on that one. That was pretty bad. But we're down, we're never out though. So next week is a whole new set of fights and a whole new potential to be galaxy brained once again. Michael, appreciate you always. You are welcome for the show, and I appreciate you lurking as you always do. You are the man. Shout out to your lovely wife as well. Appreciate you both. So yeah, I mean, it's getting late, so I guess I will put an end to this one. Again, thank you guys for being here for this. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight as to why The Smashing Machine ultimately did not succeed at the box office. And of course, tomorrow night is the podcast. I will be rewatching all of the fights tomorrow during the day, so I'll have a fresh recollection of all of the absolute wackiness that went down in Vancouver. 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, myself and Chase Parton on the Last Week's Fights podcast will be breaking down all of these fights for you and taking a look at 321 as well. So tune in for the podcast. We are in the process of going through our next MMA on film currently. Myself and Chase both are, so keep an eye out for MMA on film coming back with another movie for you very soon. And, other stuff always coming out as well. Thinking about possibly still doing that Tuesday stream, even though the Contender Series has ended, but I'm not going to hold myself to that necessarily because that's a lot of streaming and we got other stuff we got to accomplish as well. So Keep an eye on the channel as always. I appreciate you guys for always doing that. More content always coming out in some capacity. Go back and rewatch those videos that already came out. The one about Stuart Nickel, the one about Suman Mokhtarian and Australian gang violence in MMA and all of that. Make sure you're liking and commenting on all that stuff because it helps a lot. And have a great rest of your night. Great week coming up. As always, fight on, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.
It's